Hey guys, tonight we're going to do something a little different. Something slower, darker, and honestly kind of spooky. We're slipping back into a time when the stars were your nightlight, fire was your only warmth, and people didn't just sleep once. They slept twice. Yeah, that's right. You get tucked in once, drift off, wake up for a bit in the middle of the night like some kind of confused raccoon, and then go back to bed for a second round. Welcome to medieval sleep. It's weird, it's cozy, and spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this world very long. Between the plagues, poor hygiene, and a general lack of soap, your odds are not great. But don't worry, we're just visiting. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. No pressure. Also, let me know in the comments what time it is where you are and what city you're listening from. Always curious who's drifting off where. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The world before electricity is a world of shadows. Once the sun sets, you're kind of out of options. There's candlelight if you're lucky, a flickering hearth if you're home, moonlight if the sky's clear, but after that, darkness. And in that darkness, human bodies did something strange. Something modern people forgot they could even do. They fell into what's called segmented or biphasic sleep. Not one long stretch like we're used to now, but two chunks, with a quiet, eerie hour or two of wakefulness in between. You ease into this world just past sunset. The last of the firewood's been brought in. Chickens rustle in their coops, and the pigs are already snoring. You've had a supper of bread, ale, maybe a bit of salted fish if you're lucky. The day was long, really long. If you're a peasant, you spent it bent over fields, your back protesting every step. If you're more well off, maybe you just had to boss people around all day and manage your household. Either way, you're tired. Not didn't get my latte tired. The kind of tired where your whole body feels like it's melting into the ground. Around 7 or 8 p.m, the house grows quiet. Maybe you say some evening prayers. Maybe you pull your itchy wool blanket over your shoulders and huddle next to your siblings or spouse, or, heck, your in-laws, your livestock, and a passing traveller. Privacy isn't really a thing here. Sleep is communal, lumpy, and involves a lot of snoring from various sources. And then, the first sleep begins. You drift off more easily than you do today. There's no phone lighting up your face, no glowing notifications or true crime podcasts. Just the hiss of the fire dying down and the soft breathing of others around you. Scientists today call this first chunk of rest core sleep, and it's intense. Deep, slow wave, dream-rich sleep. The kind that stitches your cells back together and reorganizes your brain like a closet Marie Kondo would be proud of. But here's the thing. Around midnight or so, something odd happens. You wake up. Not in a panic, not groggy or annoyed. You just open your eyes, maybe stretch a bit, sit up. And here's the weirdest part. This is totally normal. Everyone else is awake too, or getting there. This little pocket of nighttime wakefulness is expected, even treasured. People called the first part of their sleep first sleep. They didn't think anything was wrong with waking up, it was just part of the rhythm. What do you do in this period? Well, that's coming up in the next section. But for now, let's just linger in this moment. Because honestly, it's kind of peaceful. The fire's been stoked again. There's a soft, flickering glow painting shadows on the wall. Maybe someone is whispering a prayer. Maybe someone else is, well, whispering something else entirely. It's a private time, yet oddly shared. A moment that doesn't really exist in your modern life. Historically, this two-phase sleep pattern isn't just a medieval European thing. Versions of it show up in everything from ancient Greek writings to 19th century American diaries. People would routinely describe their first sleep and second sleep, often inserting that strange little wakeful pause between the two, like it was as natural as breakfast. Which, by the way, you don't really get in the medieval world unless you're rich or lucky. But that's a problem for morning you. Let's get nerdy for just a second, because the science is actually on the side of our medieval friends. Modern studies have shown that when people are removed from artificial light, like, say, put in a cabin with only natural light cycles, their sleep naturally breaks into two chunks. Around 4 hours of sleep, then 1 to 2 hours of wakefulness, then another 3 or 4 hours of sleep. Boom! Biphasic sleep, just like the old days. Your body literally wants to do this, it's just forgotten how. Now for a little gem of a fringe fact. Some people believe that dreams during the first sleep came from God, while dreams during the second sleep came from demons. Yup. Apparently your brain's second half gets a little sketchy. Scholars and clergy warned against trusting dreams after midnight. That alone gives the middle of the night a weirdly spiritual edge, like you're caught between two worlds. But, as with all things history, there's debate. Some scholars argue that segmented sleep wasn't as widespread as we think. They say it might have been a practice limited to certain cultures, or more common in winter when nights were long and people simply had more hours to fill. Others believe the sources we rely on, diaries, manuals, prayer books, may reflect only elite experiences, not the peasant majority. Fair point. But the sheer number of references across time and culture make a strong case that sleeping twice wasn't the exception. It was the rule. So here you are, lying in the dark after your first sleep, awake but not anxious. There's no glow from a phone, no clock ticking down the hours until your alarm. Just you, your breath, the embers, and maybe a snoring pig in the corner. It's not a bad place to be. Actually, in some ways, it's kind of perfect. So you're awake now. The fire is a soft orange eye in the corner of the room, pulsing gently, shadows shifting across the beams overhead like lazy ghosts. Around you, there's the quiet murmur of others. Someone scratching their arm, someone else stirring in their sleep, maybe a whispered conversation you're not quite supposed to hear. No one panics. No one grabs for melatonin or doom scrolls through plague memes. This is the watch, the midnight vigil, the interlude between your first and second sleep. And yes, it's completely intentional. In this strange little pocket of wakefulness, your brain feels different. Not foggy, but not alert either. Looser, dreamy, a little untethered. Scientists today would call this state hypnagogic or hypnopompic, depending on whether you're falling asleep or waking up. But medieval people didn't care about the terminology. They just called it the watching time, and they made good use of it. You might poke at the embers and add another log to the fire. That's kind of your job if you're the last one up. Or if you're paranoid about being cold or attacked by something furry, then maybe you lean over and whisper something to your partner. This is prime intimacy hour. Not the rushed end-of-the-day energy you're used to. No, this is soft and unhurried. People wrote poems about the tenderness of this hour. No one was checking the time. There was no time, just firelight and each other. If you're a religious person, and frankly, in medieval Europe, everyone is whether they want to be or not, this is an ideal moment for prayer. Not the public, performative kind. Quiet, internal, eyes half open prayer. Monks had a whole structure around this, of course. Midnight prayers, matins, lauds. It was like holy nap yoga. But even average people sometimes took the quiet hours to commune with God. It felt closer somehow, like the divine was easier to hear when the world was so still. You might even do some actual chores, spin wool, mend a tunic, sharpen tools for the next day. There's a calming rhythm to these small tasks in the quiet dark. It's oddly efficient. You're not groggy, you're not distracted, you're just there. A little island of calm before sleep washes in again. And for the record, some people got weird with it. This midnight wakefulness wasn't all praying and gentle canoodling. There are records of people sneaking out of bed, heading into town to commit various types of mischief. A little gossip here, a little forbidden tryst there, maybe a tiny robbery. Midnight crime was its own thing. The idea of witching hours comes partially from this wakeful time. People feared the dark for good reason. You could get up to a lot before the sun rose, and not all of it was sacred or wholesome. Back in your modest bed, if you can call a straw mattress in a shared room with 6 other people a bed, You might pull out a small book of prayers or herbal recipes. Literacy isn't widespread, but among those who can read, this was a great moment for reflection. There's something about firelight flickering on parchment that makes even the dullest family recipe feel like forbidden wisdom. One quirky little historical nugget. There were belief systems that treated this wakeful hour almost like a second consciousness, a soul bridge. Some even thought your spirit wandered during first sleep and returned during this in-between phase, like you were catching up with yourself before diving back into dreamland. It's kind of beautiful. And also mildly unsettling. Of course, not everyone used this time wisely. Some people grumbled, tossed and turned, complained about aches and cold drafts and that one guy who always snores like a dying horse. But even the complainers accepted this break as part of the flow. No one called it insomnia. It was just life. The body wasn't broken. It was doing exactly what it was designed to do. And here's where we stumble into one of history's bigger sleep debates. Some scholars argue that this midnight wakefulness was culturally created, that it only existed because long winter nights forced people into weird schedules. Maybe, but others, especially sleep scientists in the last couple decades, point out that the brain seems to default to segmented sleep when artificial light is removed. You can run the experiment yourself. Stick people in total darkness for 12 to 14 hours a day, and their sleep splits into two neat halves, separated by, you guessed it, an hour or so of calm wakefulness. So was it nature or nurture? Did medieval folk sleep this way because of their environment or because of biology? Trick question. It's both. They had long nights and brains hardwired for this rhythm. It's like discovering that your ancestors were doing intermittent fasting without even trying. And if you're wondering when this all stopped, when this very normal, very ancient habit started being seen as disordered sleep, you'll have to wait a few sections. But spoiler, it rhymes with Industrial Revolution. Back in your quiet medieval night, the fire has burned down again. You've had your moment, maybe a snack, maybe a conversation, maybe something steamier. Now it's time for second sleep. You settle in. The blanket's warm from your body heat. Someone else sighs next to you. The air is chill, but the kind of chill that makes blankets feel like armour. You close your eyes, and like slipping through silk, you fall back into the dark. Second sleep has its own rhythm. If the first sleep is deep and restorative, the second is more dream-filled, more imaginative. You'll wake up with weirder stories in your head, and sometimes, if you believe the old wisdom, more prophetic ones. This sleep carries you toward dawn, and it feels different, lighter, more intuitive, but that's for the next section. For now, just imagine yourself tucked under a scratchy wool blanket in a world that doesn't expect you to sleep straight through the night. A world that gives you space to wake up, stretch, maybe light a candle and just be. It kind of makes you wonder who really has the normal sleep, doesn't it? You're deep into second sleep now, and let me tell you, it's a different beast from the first. It's lighter, stranger, and packed with dreams that sometimes feel like messages, and sometimes just feel like your brain got lost in its own attic. If first sleep was for healing the body, second sleep is for wandering the imagination. And yet, what's weirdest isn't the dreams themselves. It's that strange, floaty time in between. The watching hour when you woke up and somehow just existed. Let's rewind to that middle phase for a second. Historians call it the watch, or the nocturnal watch. It wasn't just some forgotten glitch in the sleep matrix. It had structure, purpose, and it wasn't some rare anomaly either. In fact, it was mentioned so casually in letters, prayer books, and literature that no one felt the need to explain it. You'd read something like, "After first sleep I went to the kitchen to warm some ale," and that's it. No footnote, no commentary. Just a midnight stroll like you might write. "After work I grabbed coffee." That little wakeful pocket between first and second sleep, usually about an hour or two, was the social, spiritual and psychological wildcard of the night. Some scholars even argue it helped people regulate emotion. Seriously. Modern sleep studies done in low-light environments show that when people have that middle-of-the-night pause, They report calmer moods, lower anxiety, and more vivid dreams. The idea is that it creates a built-in buffer between the brain's problem-solving mode and its creative processing mode. It's like sleep was once a 2-act play, and we've chopped out intermission. So what exactly did people do during this mysterious midnight window? A lot more than just lie there. Let's say you're one of the lucky ones with your own space, a small room off the main hall, or maybe just a bed curtained off from the noise. You might light a candle and read. If you were literate, and male, and wealthy, because, history, this was prime time to catch up on scripture, philosophy, or, if you're particularly rebellious, some saucy poetry from the continent. If you're a woman in a well-off household, maybe you use the time to mend a child's clothing or prepare herbs. Women were often the keepers of household medicine, and the quiet of the midnight hours was ideal for that careful kind of work. Grinding bark, mixing dried leaves, whispering prayers over sachets of lavender. One truly odd little fact. In some areas of Europe, people believed that this wakeful hour was the best time to take medicine or apply ointments. The logic? Your body was halfway between worlds. Receptive. Open. Anything applied during this time was thought to soak in deeper, heal faster, or be spiritually fortified. There are even records of midwives timing childbirth interventions to match these sleepy transitions. It's all very midnight apothecary meets enchanted forest. And hey, this was also matchmaking hour in some parts of the countryside. Yeah, you heard that right. If you were single, this quiet slice of the night might be when you crept out for a secret rendezvous. In rural villages, some courting customs revolved around nighttime visits. A young man might stop by a potential partner's window with a song or a whispered conversation. Not creepy, expected. Okay, sometimes creepy, but mostly just culturally normalised weirdness. And if a parent or chaperone caught them? Well, that depended entirely on what decade it was and how good your family's name was. Some couples, especially married ones, use this hour to connect more intimately. The medieval version of, hey, you awake? But instead of Netflix and chilling, it was more like firelight and fur blankets. There are even old medical texts that suggest this was the healthiest time for sex. Again, because the body was in a more balanced, rested state. Honestly, medieval people were way more pragmatic about this stuff than you'd expect. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. The gap between sleeps wasn't just physical, it was mental. People reported feeling like their thoughts were different in that window. Softer, more porous. This wasn't anxiety wakefulness. This was dream logic bleeding into the real world. Poets wrote during this time. Mystics claimed visions came more clearly in those hours. A few even documented encounters with spirits or angels, or at least claimed they did, which was probably more of a flex than a confession. And of course, not everyone stayed inside. In towns and cities, the wake period was when certain tradespeople quietly got to work. Bakers, milkmen, lamplighters. It was when monks would rise to chant matins, the nighttime prayers, in cold stone chapels that echoed like tombs. Imagine being up at 2 a.m. in a monastery, the air freezing, your breath misting as you chant psalms with 10 other half-asleep men in wool robes. Is it holy? Is it sleep-deprived hallucination? Yes. And then there were the less savoury characters. Thieves, vandals, even a few early night watchmen with clubs and lanterns patrolling the streets because, well, stuff happened when most people were asleep. Night was never just peaceful. It was also unpredictable. That's part of why some people preferred to stay up during the wake. Not because they couldn't sleep, but because they didn't want to. One scholar once said that this hour belonged to no one and everyone, which sounds poetic until you realise that also made it kind of dangerous. In towns, there were curfews. You could be fined or worse for being out too late. But in villages with fewer rules, midnight was a kind of informal social hour, a liminal time full of whispers and soft feet, and the occasional loud thud when someone tripped over a chicken. Eventually, though, the energy shifts. You feel it even now, curling back under the covers, pulling your scratchy blanket up to your chin. The fire is low again, the coals dimming. The room stills. Even the pig in the corner rolls over and settles. And like a slow wave returning, second sleep begins. This second chunk of sleep is lighter, more fragile. You might dream more or dream differently. You might not even feel like you slept at all, but you did. Modern research shows this phase is rich in REM, the stage tied to memory, creativity, and emotional processing. It's the part of sleep you need to stay sane, basically. But remember, your ancestors didn't know any of that. To them, this was just life, just sleep. The kind that worked, the kind that let them face another freezing dawn of ploughing fields, emptying chamber pots, or running from bears. Because yes, there were still bears. And as you drift into second sleep tonight, maybe your brain remembers a little of what it used to do. Maybe it slips into that floaty, magical place where dreams and wakefulness blur, where nothing's urgent, everything is possible, and the firelight flickers just outside your vision. Second sleep settles in like fog over a field, quiet, inevitable, strangely comforting. You don't slide into it the same way you did the first time. This one sort of floats in around you, like your body knows what it's doing even if your mind is still a little groggy from the hour of wakefulness. There's no grand ceremony. One moment you're staring at the ceiling beam trying to decide if it's creaking more than usual, and the next, you're gone, swept into dreams as natural as breathing. And here's the twist. This second sleep might be the more important of the two. It's the one where the real mental heavy lifting happens, where your brain stirs the pot of the day's memories, skims off the emotional scum, and files away whatever it decides is worth keeping. Modern sleep science has revealed that the final hours of sleep, especially during the second cycle, are loaded with REM, rapid eye movement, the stage most associated with vivid dreaming, creativity, and emotional processing. In other words, this is when your brain goes full Salvador Dali. So imagine this. You're back in your lumpy medieval bed. The fire's down to faint embers. Outside, it's dead silent, unless you're in a village near woods, in which case you might hear the occasional owl or unsettling rustle that sounds suspiciously large. But inside, it's still. Your body has warmed the sheets. Okay, straw stuff sack. And your breathing has synced up with the rhythm of the room. You dream. Not the disjointed, half-conscious dreams you sometimes get after 3 hours of Netflix and a plate of regret nachos. No, these are full-on medieval dreams. Symbolic, prophetic, ridiculous. You're walking through a field of wheat, and suddenly your dead uncle is there turning into a crow and quoting scripture. Or maybe you're sitting in church naked while the priest turns into a wolf. It doesn't make sense, but it feels like it does. People in the Middle Ages took these second sleep dreams seriously, not as random neuron firings, but as messages, sometimes from God, sometimes from the devil, and occasionally from whatever questionable stew you had for dinner. Dream books were a thing. People consulted them like horoscopes. Did you dream of a fish? Good fortune. A pig? Warning of greed. A broken ladder? Uh-oh. Someone's getting excommunicated. And remember how we talked about the belief that dreams in first sleep came from divine sources, while dreams in second sleep were more likely to be demonic or deceptive? Yeah, people were genuinely stressed about this. There were guides on how to tell if your dream came from heaven or hell. Pro tip, if it ends with a goat speaking Latin, probably the second one. This concern wasn't just personal, it was cultural. Monks wrote long texts debating the nature of dreams. Some believed God used dreams to test faith or offer warnings. Others thought dreams were just the devil's Netflix trying to slip temptation into your subconscious. Either way, nobody was treating dreams as just brain noise. These people woke up analysing their dreams like they were decoding ancient maps to spiritual treasure or disaster. Quirky historical detour for you. One medieval noblewoman is said to have woken from second sleep and written down a dream in which her cat turned into St. Peter and told her to go on a pilgrimage. She did, for 4 months. That's the level of dream commitment we're talking about here, But not everyone got to enjoy second sleep the way it was meant to be. If you were a servant or a labourer with dawn duties, your second sleep might be cut short, or even replaced entirely by a pre-dawn shift. You drag yourself out of bed in the dark, shove a crust of bread in your mouth and start preparing for another day. Cold water, sore hands, and a long list of things to do before the master even woke up. Still, most people, most of the time, had access to this second sleep window, and it was during this period that the body wrapped up its repair work. Wounds healed, muscles rested, the brain swept through itself with a tiny broom and metaphorically cleaned house. You'd wake up not with a jolt, but gradually, blinking at the pale light filtering in through wooden shutters or cracks in the thatch. But let's go back to dreams for just a second, because second sleep dreams weren't just spiritual warnings or random weirdness. They were also emotional check-ins. Studies today show that REM-heavy dreams help us process fear, grief, joy, longing, you name it. Our ancestors, without the benefit of brain scans or psychology degrees, still knew that dreams mattered. They knew you could wake up changed, comforted, or shaken. And here's something to chew on. Some historians think that the division between first and second sleep gave people more dream recall than we have today. That little gap in the middle, it let them reflect, write it down if they could, tell someone. You weren't going straight from dream to alarm clock. You had breathing space in the middle to remember, digest, and assign meaning. It's like their sleep came with its own built-in dream journal. Of course, not everyone agrees that this two-part sleep was as widespread as it sounds. Some scholars argue that the people writing about it, monks, nobles, urban elites, weren't representative of the entire population. Maybe peasants slept straight through from sheer exhaustion. Maybe the wakefulness between sleeps was just broken sleep due to discomfort or cold. There's debate, as always. But even skeptics admit the sheer volume of references makes it hard to ignore. You, in this moment, wrapped in your woolen cocoon, don't care much about that. You're not worried about sleep trends or anthropological consensus. You're just deep in second sleep, drifting in and out of something that feels half real and half remembered. You might wake once more before dawn, or not. But when the morning light starts to glow soft and gold against the wall, something inside you knows it's time. The house begins to stir. Someone coughs. Someone groans. A child rolls over and kicks someone else in the ribs. That pig, still snoring. The fire is down to cold ashes, and the air bites as you toss aside the covers and prepare to face another day. Your dreams are already slipping away, but not all of them. And as strange as it may seem, you feel good, rested. Not in a slept 9 straight hours on a memory foam mattress kind of way, but in a real way. Your body did what it needed to do, and your brain had time to do its weird, wonderful brain things. 2 sleeps, 1 wake, all natural, all done without a single push notification or smart alarm. Kind of makes modern sleep feel a little synthetic, doesn't it? You're groggy but alive. The room's still dim, but dawn is creeping in like a soft-spoken intruder, painting everything in that cold, grey light that makes you question your life choices, like sleeping in a shared room with 6 people and a goat. Welcome to medieval morning. You made it through the night. 2 sleeps, 1 wake, 1 fire reduced to a pile of glowing crumbs, and approximately 4 dreams involving talking animals. Not bad. But while you were snuggled under your scratchy blanket, dreaming of featherless dragons or a really judgmental baker, someone else was also up, very much on purpose. Someone who never got to do the whole 2-sleep routine in peace. Someone whose entire schedule revolved around the midnight hour, because God said so. Or more accurately, the rule of St. Benedict did. Let's talk about monks. You might think monastic life in the Middle Ages was all peace and parchment, but in reality, it was closer to spiritual boot camp, with a sleep schedule that would make a modern startup founder cry. Benedictine monks, especially, followed a strict daily rhythm called the Divine Office, a series of prayers spaced out over the day and night. The most brutal of these? Matins, the night office. Imagine this. You're a monk in a stone monastery somewhere in 12th century France. It's winter. There's snow on the ground. Your robe is basically a woolsack, and your sandals have holes in them. You've just drifted off into first sleep when a bell clangs in the tower. It's not a dream. It's your wake-up call, usually around 2 a.m. You rise in silence. Always silence. No groaning, no sighing, no, just 5 more minutes, Brother Thomas. You walk through icy hallways lit only by candlelight. Your breath clouds in front of you. Then you enter the cold stone chapel, which smells faintly of incense and centuries of breath. You kneel, and you begin to chant. The idea behind Matins is simple. Wake in the dead of night to praise God. Monks believed that this in-between time, this threshold between first and second sleep, was the holiest hour. The world was quiet. Evil was said to roam more freely in the darkness, so the monks met it with Latin psalms and unwavering discipline. It's intense. You're sleep-deprived, hungry and half-frozen, and you're reciting the Psalter from memory, your voice joining the droning harmony of a dozen other tired souls. It's eerie and beautiful and just a little bit terrifying. But it wasn't optional. This practice wasn't just about spiritual discipline. It was also thought to protect the monastery. Monks believed that constant prayer created a kind of holy shield around their walls. Even while everyone else in the region was asleep or up to no good during the watch hour, monks were on duty, holding the line between heaven and earth. And here's a wild little fringe fact. Some monasteries rotated which monks got up for the night office, but in the stricter orders, everyone had to be there, no matter what. There are stories of monks collapsing mid-psalm or sneaking in sips of wine just to stay awake. One particularly fed-up abbot is rumoured to have suspended a monk by the ankles for falling asleep during Lauds. A bit dramatic, sure, but nothing says pious discipline like upside-down timeouts. Now, you'd think this kind of spiritual sleep sabotage would make monks miserable. But here's the thing. It didn't, at least not all of them. Some monks actually reported that the midnight office gave them a heightened sense of connection. They spoke of visions, of feeling lighter, holier, closer to the divine. The stillness of the night, paired with the repetition of ancient prayers, created a trance-like state. It's meditation, medieval style. Of course, not everyone in monastic circles agreed on how much sleep was just enough to keep the holiness flowing. There were debates, lots of them. Some orders allowed monks to return to bed after matins, catching their second sleep until sunrise. Others expected them to push through the night and nap later in the day. Some abbots even experimented with nap schedules that would make polyphasic sleep YouTubers jealous. It was like spiritual productivity hacking, with less coffee and more candle wax. And outside the cloister walls, these patterns bled into lay life too. Monks set the rhythm of the medieval world. Their bells marked the hours, their midnight prayers echoed across fields and through towns. If you lived near a monastery, your sleep was often framed, literally, by their routine. First sleep bell rings, matins begins. Even if you weren't religious, even if you were just trying to enjoy your firelit wakefulness in peace, the chant in the distance reminded you that time never really stopped. In some towns, the church bell even served as a curfew or security measure. The ringing around midnight wasn't just spiritual, it was practical. Time to bank the fire, lock the doors, say your prayers, don't get caught outside. That being said, not everyone loved hearing monks mumble about salvation while they were trying to get cozy with their partner or sneak out to visit a friend. There are accounts, often whispered and tucked into footnotes, of people blaming monks for insomnia. How am I supposed to sleep with all that holy racket? Paraphrased, obviously. Still, monastic influence on sleep culture was massive. In fact, some of the earliest formal references to segmented sleep come from monastic documents. Logs, prayer guides, and rules that clearly assume people are waking between two distinct sleep periods. It wasn't questioned. It was life. Just like cows mooing, bread baking, or cold feet from inadequate socks. And if you're wondering, yes, this sort of nighttime spiritual programming extended beyond Europe. There are parallels in Islamic prayer traditions, in Buddhist temple routines, in various indigenous practices where nighttime is sacred, reflective, and far from idle. But we'll dig into global sleep rhythms later on. For now, just picture it. A moonlit cloister, bare feet on stone, a chorus of tired voices rising in cold harmony, while the rest of the world lies in bed, hovering between dreams. There's something hauntingly beautiful about it, even if your modern self would absolutely hit snooze and throw the blanket over your head. So while you snuggled into your second sleep and dreamed of prophetic goats and firelit fields, monks were out there chanting into the dark. Not because they couldn't sleep, but because they chose not to. Because for them, midnight wasn't the end of something. It was the holiest beginning. You don't have much time left in bed. The fire's gone from embers to ashes. The rooster outside has already screamed his truth, and someone in the next room just dropped a chamber pot. Welcome to medieval morning. It's loud, it's cold, and it doesn't wait for you to hit snooze. But before we rush into the day, let's linger just a bit longer in bed, because how people slept wasn't just about biology or religion. It was also about where you were, what you owned, and who got to share your sleeping space. Let's zoom out and look at hearth and home. We're talking about a time when personal space as you understand it did not exist. No one's mum was shouting, "Give your brother some space," because frankly there wasn't any. The average peasant home was a single-room structure with one fire, one sleeping area, and one very awkward way of coexisting through the night. You, your spouse, your kids, maybe your in-laws, possibly an apprentice, a servant, and, let's not forget, a few animals, all bundled together in a jumble of limbs and snoring. Not because anyone was especially cuddly, because it was necessary. Heat wasn't optional. You couldn't afford to waste firewood by heating multiple rooms. You all huddled in the warmest place, near the hearth. Beds, if you had them, were wooden frames with straw or feather-stuffed mattresses. Most of the time, though, it was sacks of straw on the floor or a shared pallet. You put down some blankets, lay down shoulder to shoulder, and hoped no one had eaten anything too garlicky for dinner. And no one thought this was strange. Sharing a sleeping space with family, servants, or even guests was normal. Hospitality wasn't just about food, it was about offering warmth, safety, and a chunk of blanket. That traveller passing through your village? He might end up sleeping beside you and your toddler. It wasn't sketchy, it was survival. That also means people got very used to sleeping under less than ideal conditions. You're adjusting your blanket to avoid a draft. They were adjusting theirs to avoid a chicken pecking their feet. Noise, movement, body heat. It was all part of the equation. In fact, some historians argue that people learned to sleep through it all. That, unlike us, they weren't obsessed with silence and darkness. They accepted sleep as a flexible, communal act. You didn't go to sleep. You just sort of eased into it whenever and however the conditions allowed. Even the idea of a bed meant different things depending on your status. If you were wealthy, congratulations. You had a proper frame, maybe even a canopy to trap heat and keep out bugs. Beds were status symbols. They were ornately carved, sometimes so heavy they were passed down through generations. In royal or noble homes, beds were so luxurious they made modern hotel rooms look sad. Silk sheets, embroidered pillows, and enough space to stage a minor sword fight. And still, someone was probably sleeping at the foot of your bed, or on a bench nearby, or curled up on a rug in case you needed anything in the night. Privacy was for monks and royalty, and even then, not always. Let's talk about nightwear, since you're probably imagining everyone in those romantic flowy nightgowns and floppy nightcaps. Hate to break it to you, but most people slept in their underclothes. Linen shirts, if they were lucky, or just naked. Less fabric meant more warmth under heavy blankets, and if you were sharing a bed, well, modesty took a back seat to practicality. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You were trying not to freeze. Now here's a strange little detail. In some households, especially wealthier ones, people actually had bedtime routines. Not skincare and scented candles, but more like remove lice combs from hair and make sure the rat traps are set. Some people burned herbs or incense near the bed, part spiritual, part deodorizing. And in fancier homes, servants might warm the bedding with heated bricks wrapped in cloth. The medieval version of an electric blanket minus the electricity and the safety standards. But let's not romanticize it too much. Medieval homes were gross by today's standards. Floors were packed earth, lice were common, bathing wasn't nightly or even weekly, bedding was rarely washed. You did what you could to stay warm and not get sick, which often meant multiple people under one blanket huddling like penguins. Oh, and beds were often shared between strangers. This wasn't just a poor thing. Even travellers staying at inns might be asked to bunk up with someone. If you showed up late and there was only one bed left, you were sharing. Inns didn't sell rooms, they sold bed space. Think of it like a really early version of Airbnb but with less charm and more open sores. So, sleeping was inherently social, and that shaped how people thought about it. You weren't expected to toss and turn alone in the dark, staring at the ceiling. You were part of a living, breathing organism, the household. You adjusted your rhythms to match those around you. If someone got up during the watch to stoke the fire or use the chamber pot, you shifted but didn't wake fully. If your neighbour got up to pray, you might join in or simply roll over. And here's something unexpectedly beautiful. There are accounts of people whispering stories to each other during the night. Parents telling tales to calm children, grandparents recounting local legends, even lovers murmuring poems. The space between first and second sleep wasn't just about solitude, it was about connection. It was one of the only quiet moments you had with your household. Of course, all of this varied wildly based on class and region. In wealthier homes, family members might have their own rooms. In castles, sleeping quarters were still shared, but more by rank. Servants slept near the lords. Guards slept near the entrances. And somewhere in all that grandeur, you'd still find a noble snoring like a bear on a velvet mattress, while a maid curled up in the corner on a sheepskin rug. But the principle held. Whether you were in a farmhouse or a manor, sleep was a group activity. It was shaped by proximity, necessity, and the ever-present chill. You weren't sleeping in pristine silence. You were sleeping in the middle of life. Warm bodies, hushed voices, and the crackle of a dwindling fire. And maybe, weirdly, that's what made it work. Sleep wasn't this isolated, clinical thing. It wasn't optimized or tracked. It wasn't a luxury. It was part of the rhythm of living with others. And sure, it came with fleas and awkward smells. But it also came with stories, shared warmth, and the quiet hum of human presence. You're almost out of bed now. Someone's opened a shutter, and cold light floods in. It's time to put your bare feet on the freezing floor and start the day. But as you shiver your way toward the fireplace, maybe you glance back at the bed and think, hey, that wasn't so bad. Weird, cramped, noisy, but not bad. At least the goat didn't snore this time. You finally step out of bed, or more accurately, off the bundle of straw that did its best to impersonate a mattress, and feel the cold floor slap your feet like it has a personal vendetta. Morning in the medieval world is not for the faint of heart. The fire's gone out completely now. The light creeping through the cracks in the shutters is grey and indifferent, and someone's already out there starting chores with the kind of noisy enthusiasm that should be illegal before sunrise. But before you throw yourself into the business of the day, whether that means grinding grain, chasing livestock, or trying not to die of exposure, it's worth stepping back and asking, what did your actual sleeping environment look like? Let's take a slow, quiet walk through the medieval bedroom. And don't worry, we'll tread lightly. There's probably someone still asleep in there, and the last thing we want is to get hit with a wooden spoon. So first things first, bedrooms weren't really a thing. Not the way you know them. In most homes, even relatively well-off ones, there wasn't a specific room just for sleeping. People slept where they lived, where they ate, cooked, stored tools, told stories, and occasionally fought about who left the door open. The hearth was the heart of the house, literally and figuratively, and sleep happened around it. On benches, on floor pallets, in corners, anywhere that could hold a body and some blankets. Now, if you were fancy, let's say noble or rich merchant level, you might have something resembling a bedroom, but it wasn't necessarily private. A lord's bedchamber, for example, was often a semi-public space. Guests might be entertained there. Servants would come and go freely. It wasn't uncommon for people to conduct business, receive visitors, or even settle disputes from their bed. That huge, carved, canopied monstrosity wasn't just for sleeping. It was a power move. And what a bed it was. The beds of the wealthy were wooden masterpieces. Heavy, creaky, often ornately carved with religious symbols, family crests, or what we'll politely call bold mythological scenes. Some had high posts with heavy curtains to keep in warmth, block out light, and maintain some illusion of privacy. Mattresses were stuffed with feathers or straw, depending on budget and patience. Sheets? Linen, if you had the means. Otherwise you might just drape yourself in woolen blankets or furs and call it a night. But here's the catch. Beds were not for one. Even in the nicest homes, beds were often shared. A master might sleep with a servant nearby, or even in the same bed, especially if the servant was tasked with waking them at a particular hour or helping them through the night. Children piled in with parents. Wet nurses slept with infants. The sheer practicality of heat conservation made solitary sleep kind of inefficient. And let's talk about the smells, because you're probably imagining your medieval sleep experience as rustic and romantic, maybe even lit by a candle and smelling faintly of herbs. Nope. Try sweat, smoke, damp wool and feet. Lots of feet. The combination of poor ventilation, multiple bodies, livestock proximity and fire soot gave the air a certain texture. If someone had a pot of lavender or rosemary by the bed, it was either to mask odours or ward off evil, sometimes both. But either way, it was fighting a losing battle. And speaking of fighting, bugs, fleas, lice, bed bugs, you name it. Even nobility dealt with them. There's a reason medieval texts often mention combs, powders, and purifying rituals. Clean bedding was a luxury, and most people didn't wash sheets very often, if at all. You might beat the mattress outside once in a while, shake out the blankets, maybe brush off the visible crumbs of your midnight snack, which was probably just dry bread. But laundry? That was an ordeal. Water had to be hauled, heated, soap made or bought, and linen scrubbed and dried. So unless you had servants or zero other responsibilities, that sheet was living its best long-term life on your bed. Let's peek around your room, or your corner rather. What else do you see? Likely a low wooden chest or a shelf with a candle stump. Maybe a few religious icons or charms hung by the bed. A rosary, a dried herb bundle, a carved figure for luck or protection. Superstition and faith were constant bedfellows, especially at night. People feared the dark. It was the realm of spirits, demons, thieves, and disease. You might whisper a prayer before sleeping, or sleep with an amulet under your pillow to guard against nightmares or nocturnal visitations. One quirky belief that floated around: the night air could make you sick. Many thought that air at night carried disease or evil humours, especially if it drifted in from swamps, graveyards, or other questionable locations. Windows were shuttered tight not just for warmth, but for protection. Fresh air? No thanks. The inside of a smoky, body-packed room felt safer. Debatable. Now, lighting. That's a short discussion, because there wasn't much. You might have a tallow candle, which smelled like boiled sheep and made everything look like a horror movie, or an oil lamp if you were rich and had access to oil. But most people relied on the hearth. Once that fire burned down, your light was moon, stars, and maybe a glowing log if you were lucky. The human eye does adjust, and people got surprisingly good at navigating by minimal light. Still, nighttime indoors was dim, and you had to move slowly to avoid smashing your shin into furniture or stepping on someone's sleeping child. Again. Let's not forget the sounds. Homes weren't exactly soundproof. Thin walls, no insulation, creaky everything. You'd hear your neighbours snore, shift, mutter in their sleep, argue, and occasionally relieve themselves into a chamber pot with all the subtlety of a brass band. And yes, that pot usually stayed in the room until morning, just waiting, festering. And if you lived in a town or village, you'd also hear outside noises, barking dogs, roosters at the absolute wrong time, maybe a drunk stumbling down the street or a suspicious scuffle. If your home was near a monastery, the bells might wake you for matins or lauds. That meant your sleep, both first and second, was layered with environmental rhythms. You didn't just sleep in a room, you slept in a web of sounds, smells, shadows, and habits passed down over generations. There's a debate among historians about how much people liked their sleeping setups. Were they content with shared space and scratchy wool? Or did they dream, pun intended, of private rooms, softer sheets, and actual silence? It's hard to know for sure, but considering how few complaints made it into personal accounts, we can guess that people mostly just adapted. They didn't expect sleep to be perfect, they expected it to be enough, and for the most part it was. So tonight, when you're curling up in your memory foam oasis with climate control and lavender-scented pillow spray, spare a thought for your medieval counterparts. Huddled by the fire, one candle guttering, dreams swirling behind heavy eyes surrounded by family, neighbours, possibly a goat, and the quiet, breathing dark. And hey, at least your mattress doesn't contain straw, fleas, or bits of last week's turnip stew. The candle's gone out, the fire's little more than a memory, and the light outside has officially crossed from melancholy grey to mildly hopeful beige. It's morning, and medieval life doesn't wait. Someone's outside splitting wood. Someone else is trying to get a cow to cooperate. A child is crying, probably because they've just stepped barefoot into something warm and mysterious. Welcome to the start of another long, honest day in a world where sleep didn't happen on your terms, it happened on nature's. But before the rooster screams again, let's take a closer look at something that shaped everything about medieval sleep, especially its segmented nature: light. Or, more accurately, the lack of it. In a world without electricity, light is not a casual convenience. It is a precious, fleeting substance, and its absence changes everything. Your day is chained to the sun. When it sets, your options get real limited, real fast. Let's break it down. Once the sun disappears, you're plunged into a world governed by firelight, candles, oil lamps, hearths, and let's be honest, they're not great. A single candle gives you about as much illumination as a weak flashlight with dying batteries. Enough to read a sentence, maybe find your boots. Not enough to get any real work done. Not comfortably anyway. So you start winding down. Your eyes start adjusting to dimness. Your body takes the cue and begins slowing everything down. Melatonin production ramps up. You start feeling drowsy, not because your circadian rhythm is so disciplined, but because you've got no light bullying your brain into staying awake. That's the beauty and the tyranny of flame-based lighting. Take candles, for example. Tallow candles were the working-class standard. Made from rendered animal fat, they smelled vaguely like soup and burned fast. You didn't waste them. A family might have only one or two to get through the evening, if you were lucky. Beeswax candles were for the wealthy, or for the church. They burned cleaner and smelled nicer, but they were pricey. Like, this candle could feed you for a week, pricey. So most people use firelight. The hearth was everything. It was your oven, your light source, your heating system, your nightlight. And it wasn't portable. If you needed to get up in the night, during the watch, you either had to fumble around in the dark, light a fresh candle, if you dared, or carefully steal a glowing coal and use it to start a new flame, which was its own mini-game of risk and reward. What does this have to do with segmented sleep? Everything. Because light didn't flood your house at 9 p.m. or 11 or 2 a.m. Your body naturally followed the sun's rhythm. You went to bed early, not because you were especially disciplined, but because it was dark, cold, and there was nothing else to do. And when you went to bed that early, say 8 p.m., you didn't sleep straight through until dawn. Instead, your body followed a biphasic pattern. First sleep, wakeful watch, second sleep. The absence of artificial light created space for segmented sleep. Modern studies back this up in fascinating ways. When researchers took people and put them in environments without electric lighting, just candles and natural cycles, the participants almost immediately reverted to medieval sleep. They'd go to bed early, wake up for an hour or two in the middle of the night, then fall back asleep. No one told them to do this. Their bodies just remembered. Turns out your brain has a built-in script for life without LEDs. It's been rehearsing it for tens of thousands of years. And during the wakeful watch, the time between sleeps, what do you think people used for light? Exactly. Candles and firelight. This limited light didn't just affect when people were awake, it shaped how they were awake. You weren't doing chores under bright fluorescence. You weren't reading for hours or writing epic poems. You were whispering, sitting still, maybe praying, maybe cuddling, maybe staring into the fire like a medieval philosopher contemplating the meaning of stew. It was a quiet wakefulness, a low-energy wakefulness, one designed for a gentle transition from sleep to consciousness and back again. This is important because a lot of modern people confuse waking up at 2 a.m. with something's wrong. Insomnia, restlessness, broken sleep. But in the medieval world, it wasn't just normal, it was productive. People expected to be awake for a bit, and they filled that time with low-stress, low-light activities. They didn't jolt out of bed in a panic. They didn't doom-scroll in the dark. They just existed, softly. And while we're here, let's talk about night vision. Yes, that's right. People had better night vision. Not in the superpower sense, but in the you spend your whole life living in darkness, and your eyes adapt kind of way. Your pupils would dilate more efficiently. You'd get used to navigating by moonlight. You learned how to see just enough. Light discipline wasn't optional. It was a survival skill. Lighting too many candles. Wasteful. Lighting the wrong kind of fire. Dangerous. Not lighting anything at all. Normal. One particularly quirky practice. The use of dark adapted eyes as a kind of weapon. Thieves and nighttime mischief makers often had the upper hand over guards because their eyes were used to the dark. Some accounts even describe thieves covering one eye during the day, like pirates, so they'd have one night-ready eye to use after sunset. It sounds cartoonish, but try walking around at night after staring at a campfire for 3 hours. Your vision is trash. Meanwhile, candlelight wasn't just a necessity, it was a mood. Medieval texts are full of descriptions of late-night gatherings around the fire, candlelit prayers, whispered conversations, and secret meetings. The flicker of flame created intimacy. It softened the world. You couldn't see very far, just what was in front of you. It brought people closer together, not just physically, but emotionally. And it changed how they dreamed. Yep, we're back to dreams again. Because here's something you've probably never considered. How much artificial light dulls your dreams? Modern research suggests that exposure to electric light, even in small amounts, can suppress REM sleep and reduce dream vividness. But in the medieval world, darkness was thick, deep, and almost total. Dreams weren't background noise, they were events, and the limited, flickering light around you as you drifted off only added to the dreamlike atmosphere. So yes, your LED-lit, Netflix-cued sleep might be clean and scheduled, but your medieval counterpart. They were slipping into sleep surrounded by shadow and silence, wrapped in wool, head full of prayers or stories, and mind wide open to the strange symbolic world of dreams. It wasn't efficient, it wasn't optimized, but it worked. It was a sleep sculpted by darkness, where the night had texture, weight, rhythm. You weren't fighting the dark, you were living in it. And maybe that's the real difference. You sleep to escape the dark. They slept with it. So tonight, when you flip off the switch, think about that tiny flicker of firelight in a medieval home. The shadows dancing on the walls, the voices whispering quietly in the dark, a world wrapped in softness and shadow waiting for first sleep to fall like dusk. So, now you know the dark. Not the power's out for 5 minutes and you panic Google candles kind of dark, but the old, honest dark. The kind where even moonlight feels like a luxury, and a single flickering candle can make or break your entire mood. And you've seen how that darkness pulled people into sleep differently than it does today. Softly, gradually, and twice. But what if I told you this wasn't just a historical oddity? It's not just monks and medieval peasants. It's not even just the past. Because according to modern science, your body still wants to sleep like it's the 1300s. Yep. Even with your blackout curtains, smart alarm clocks, and sleepy time gummies, your brain still carries ancient instructions for biphasic sleep. Let's get into the science. Don't worry, I'll make it comfy. Back in the early 1990s, a sleep researcher named Thomas Ware did a little experiment. He took a group of healthy people, removed all artificial light, and gave them 14 hours of darkness a day. That's it. No forced sleep schedule, no midnight Gregorian chants, no scary straw mattresses, just humans and darkness. The result? After a few weeks of adjustment, the participants started sleeping in 2 distinct shifts, with a calm, wakeful period in between, exactly like people did in the Middle Ages. First, about 4 hours of deep sleep, then 1 to 2 hours of quiet rest, then a second round of sleep lasting another 3 to 4 hours. This wasn't insomnia, it wasn't fragmented, it was natural, peaceful, rhythmic. That same sleep structure has been observed in traditional societies too, in rural Madagascar, among hunter-gatherer groups, in regions without electric grids or late-night TikTok marathons. Everywhere light is scarce and nights are long, biphasic sleep emerges. So what does this mean? It means that segmented sleep isn't a weird medieval quirk. It's the default setting, a built-in feature of human biology that you've just been trained to override. Which is wild, considering that so many modern people lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m, thinking they're broken. Here's a thought. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're just experiencing their body's ancestral memory of the watch hour. The wakeful pause between sleep stages that was once used for prayer, meditation, intimacy, or just staring at the fire and thinking about how bad turnips taste. Today, though, if you wake up in the middle of the night, you panic. You reach for your phone. You check the time, count the hours until your alarm, spiral into performance anxiety over how ruined tomorrow will be. That gentle in-between state, the one your ancestors embraced, is now labelled insomnia and considered a problem. But what if it's not? What if, when your eyes pop open at 2 a.m, that's not your brain breaking down? It's your brain doing exactly what it evolved to do. That wakeful period between sleeps, called nocturnal wakefulness in research circles, is now being explored for its mental and emotional benefits. Turns out the mind in that state is especially calm and creative. You're not quite dreaming, but you're not fully rational either. It's like sleep mode and active mode had a polite, drowsy baby. Some therapists even suggest leaning into it. If you wake up in the middle of the night and don't feel stressed, try journaling, meditating, reflecting, letting your mind wander instead of wrestling it back into unconsciousness like it owes you money. Because forcing sleep rarely works, but accepting a different rhythm, that's something your body might respond to. And now we're deep in one of the big debates of sleep science. What is normal sleep, really? Because up until the 20th century, there wasn't a one-size-fits-all answer. Sure, biphasic sleep was common in medieval Europe and other pre-industrial societies. But other cultures followed different rhythms. In warmer climates, daytime naps, siestas were the norm. In some regions, polyphasic sleep, multiple short sleep periods spread across day and night, was common, especially for labourers or people in unpredictable environments. So modern sleep, one solid 7 to 9 hour block, isn't natural, it's engineered. It's a product of industrialisation, factory shifts, electric lighting, and eventually our 24/7 digital culture. Your ancestors weren't counting sleep cycles on fitness trackers. They slept when it got dark, woke in the middle, and went back to sleep when the fire burned low. And they survived just fine, barring, the Black Death and poor dental hygiene. One quirky scientific finding: in darkness, your brain releases more prolactin, a hormone associated with relaxation and satiety. It floods your system during that middle-of-the-night watch. People in segmented sleep studies often report feeling unusually calm during that wakeful hour. Not groggy, not panicked, just peaceful. Like their brain is whispering, "Everything's fine, let's just sit for a minute." And now, here's the kicker. Some sleep therapists believe that embracing biphasic patterns, rather than fighting them, could help reduce modern sleep disorders. Insomnia, anxiety, even depression. Not in every case, of course, but enough to start raising eyebrows. The idea is that retraining your brain to accept this old rhythm could help realign your sleep with what your biology actually wants. But we're not exactly set up for it anymore, are we? Our lives demand fixed wake times. Work starts at 8 or 9. Schools open early. We structure our schedules around daytime performance, not natural cycles. And that middle-of-the-night wakefulness? It's treated like a failure. A sign that your sleep hygiene is off, that your caffeine intake is wrong, that you need a new pillow or a new mattress or a new supplement that tastes like regret and lavender. So we fight it. We fight our own bodies. But medieval people didn't. They worked with their rhythms. Not because they were more enlightened, they definitely weren't, but because they had no choice. No electricity. No clock watching. Just darkness, firelight, and the slow pulse of night. And maybe, just maybe, that's something worth rediscovering. Not by selling your possessions and moving into a forest cottage, unless you're into that, but by learning to stop panicking when your eyes snap open at 2 a.m, by creating quiet space for that watch hour, by realizing that broken sleep might actually be whole sleep if you stop expecting it to look like a straight line. So the next time you find yourself awake in the dark, don't reach for your phone. Just lie there, breathe, listen. You're not alone. You're in the company of centuries of people who sat by the fire, whispered prayers, shared secrets, or simply stared into the night. And they were just fine. You know that moment when you wake up and you're not sure what's real? Like, are you in your bed? Or are you still inside that weird dream where your childhood dog is president and also made of soup? Yeah, that's where we are now. Because this section, the time between first and second sleep, isn't just physically different. It's mentally and emotionally different. You're awake, but it's not the same awake you feel at 10 a.m. after 2 coffees. This is twilight consciousness, a space between logic and dream, reality and memory, where the rules are a little softer and time doesn't tick quite the same way. And for medieval folks, this weird little slice of night was prime dream time, and they didn't waste it. Let's talk dreams. In the Middle Ages, dreams weren't just weird stories your brain threw at you like a bored screenwriter. Dreams had meaning, sometimes serious meaning, life-changing meaning. People believed dreams could be divine messages, prophetic warnings, temptations from the devil, or even a record of your soul's little night journey through the invisible world. You'd wake up in that eerie, candlelit stillness between first and second sleep and think, wait, what was that? And depending on who you were, you might whisper a prayer, or jot it down, or shake your spouse and say, "You're not going to believe what I just saw." One thing was for sure, people remembered their dreams, and they cared. This was a time when dream books were a real genre. You could flip through pages and look up symbols the way you check WebMD now. Did you dream of birds? That meant freedom, or betrayal, or both, depending on the type of bird. A storm? That might mean divine punishment, or change, or indigestion. It's a flexible science. And dreams weren't just personal. They were shared, discussed, examined. In monastic communities, dreams were sometimes brought up during confession. Among the laity, you might ask a local wise woman what your dream meant. Or, if you were rich and important and your dream felt really spicy, you might even write to a bishop or a scholar. But here's the part that makes this extra fascinating. The dreams that happened in second sleep were often treated differently from those in first sleep. The theory went like this. First sleep, deep, early night sleep, was more likely to be pure. your mind was quieter. Your soul was still fresh from prayer or scripture. So dreams during this time, possibly divine, visions, angelic whispers, clues from God about what to do with your land or which saint wanted a new chapel. Second sleep dreams, however, got weird, and people knew it. They called this time the false morning in some writings, a dangerous liminal phase. The first part of the night was safe, sleeping in the arms of God. But by the second round, you were drifting into a looser, wilder state of mind, the kind of dream where you're flying through a castle made of cheese and your grandmother is there dressed as a knight. These dreams weren't discarded, but they were viewed with caution. In fact, some religious texts specifically warned against trusting dreams that came during second sleep. The devil, it was believed, liked to whisper in your ear while your defences were down. Not with nightmares necessarily, but with false comfort, flattery, lies, the kinds of dreams that made you think you were wise or powerful or special. And honestly, fair. Those dreams do hit different. Modern sleep science adds an interesting layer to this. The second half of sleep is when REM dominates. That's the part of the cycle where your brain lights up like a fireworks show. Dreams are more vivid, more emotional, more chaotic. It's also when your body is paralysed, a lovely feature called REM atonia, to prevent you from acting out your dreams, which would definitely ruin your social standing at a medieval sleepover. So while medieval thinkers blamed demons for strange second sleep dreams, science suggests it's just what the brain does when it's in REM overdrive. It sifts through emotions, rehearses fears, tries on alternate lives like costumes. And if you've ever had a dream that felt so real you carried it with you all day, yeah, that was probably from your version of second sleep. Here's a fun, slightly unsettling historical tidbit. Dreams were sometimes used in court. Yep, there are documented cases where people brought forward dreams as evidence. I dreamed that this man stole my sheep. And in some places that might actually get you an investigation. We're not talking CSI, Dream Division, but in a small village with no witnesses and a dream that involved a talking lamb with your neighbour's haircut. Hey, it was something. Also, if you dreamed of someone who had recently died, people took it very seriously. The dead weren't just gone. They were in a kind of liminal space, and their appearances in dreams were often interpreted as warnings or requests. Dream visitations could spark pilgrimages, donations, even the building of a shrine. One noblewoman reportedly had a dream in which her late husband asked her to found a monastery in his name. She woke up, hired some masons, and got to work. Imagine basing your real estate investments on dream architecture. That's commitment. But dreams weren't all religious guilt and spiritual revelations. Some were just weird, and people loved them. There are medieval stories that read like dream fan fiction. People turning into animals, doors leading to underground feasts, talking trees, horses that quote the Bible. Sometimes dreams were just dreams, confusing, entertaining, maybe a little embarrassing. And sometimes they were folded into larger cultural myths and moral tales. You see, the line between dream and waking life was blurrier in medieval minds. The night wasn't separate from the day, it was an extension of it. What you dreamed at night could, and often did, influence what you did during the day. And if you were awake between sleeps, you were in that perfect space to catch those dreams before they slipped away. The watch period wasn't just for lighting the fire or sneaking a snack. It was for remembering, processing, interpreting, maybe sharing. You'd lie there next to your spouse, sibling or goat and murmur, "You'll never believe what I just dreamed." And someone would respond, "Wait, me too." You'd talk softly, with the fire's last glow warming your faces, and for a brief moment you weren't just in the same room, you were in each other's imaginations. That's the kind of intimacy we don't often get today. We wake up and forget our dreams before we reach for our phone. But in a time when dreams were sacred, you paid attention, and the night gave you a second chance to catch them. So next time you wake in the dark, heart fluttering with fragments of some strange inner world, don't push it away. Sit with it. Think about it. Write it down. Because maybe your dreams aren't broken, maybe they're just medieval. Okay, so let's say you've just woken up from your second sleep. Maybe you had a dream that made you question your relationship with your cousin. Maybe you were a swan fighting a bishop in a cathedral made of cheese. Or maybe, just maybe, you didn't dream at all, because something else was happening during that mysterious window between first and second sleep. Something less sacred, less poetic, and significantly more chaotic. Because not everyone used the watch hour for quiet reflection and dream analysis. Nope. Some folks were getting into serious trouble. Welcome to Midnight Mischief, the darker and sometimes deeply entertaining side of segmented sleep. You're in that liminal hour. Most of the village is resting between sleeps, curled under blankets, muttering their sleepy nonsense. But outside, things are stirring, and not the good kind. This is when the streets were quiet enough to sneak, and dark enough to hide. And in the medieval world, where law enforcement was basically the angry guy with a stick, crime thrived in the in-between. First, let's talk theft. Night was prime time for burglars. Doors weren't reinforced, locks were laughable. A determined thief could enter a home through a window, roof, or, if they were especially gutsy, just walk in while everyone was asleep. The best time? That hour or two between first and second sleep, when people had already dozed off but hadn't yet entered their lighter, dream-filled second phase. It was dark. It was quiet. It was perfect. Records show that towns and cities often dealt with an uptick in petty crime during this window, especially theft of food, livestock, or clothing. You know, the important stuff. Shoes were stolen so often at night that some towns issued fines for people who didn't secure them inside. A shoe thief wasn't just annoying, he was economically devastating. But it wasn't just about stealing your best pair of goat leather sandals. More serious crimes happened under the cover of the watch hour darkness. Assaults, trespassing, smuggling, even murder. And with the streets mostly empty, criminals could operate with relative impunity. The only people likely to be out were other criminals, night watchmen, or, if you were very unlucky, someone on a midnight spiritual walk who happened to see too much. Now, were there actual police? Kind of. Most towns had a night watch, a rotating group of local men tasked with patrolling the streets after dark. These guys weren't professionals. They were often unpaid volunteers, or volunteers, in the sense that refusing might get you fined or shamed. They carried lanterns, sometimes weapons, and shouted the hours like human clocks. Midnight and all's well, even when it wasn't. They were meant to deter crime, but often they were just guys trying to stay awake and not fall into a ditch. They weren't tracking footprints or interrogating suspects with lantern-light intensity. Mostly they walked around, tried not to die, and occasionally chased someone they caught mid-burglary. One historical gem. In 14th century London, there were complaints that night watchmen were actually themselves committing crimes. Yep, you give a man a lantern and a little bit of power, and suddenly he's knocking over alehouses at 1 a.m. So yeah, it was a system. Not a great one, but a system. And it wasn't just about theft. The midnight watch was also peak time for unlicensed behaviour of a more social kind. Let's talk illicit rendezvous. You didn't always get privacy during the day. If you were in love, or more often just interested, and your family wasn't having it, nighttime became your opportunity. People snuck out to meet lovers in barns, fields, alleyways, or even in each other's homes while the rest of the household slept. Quiet footsteps, carefully unlatched doors, very awkward morning conversations if you were caught. Some towns issued curfews to try to stop this kind of behaviour. Bells would ring at a set time each night to signal the official start of lock your doors and go to sleep or else. But in practice, enforcement was spotty, especially in rural areas. The darker the night, the safer your secrets. And then, of course, we arrive at one of the great fears of the medieval night, witchcraft. If something went wrong during the day, milk curdled, crops failed, your back hurt, there was a decent chance someone would blame something that happened during the night. And often, that meant accusations of nighttime sorcery. The idea was that witches and heretics used the night watch, the time when God's gaze had dimmed to work their mischief. People reported seeing figures wandering the woods at midnight, strange lights flickering on the moors, odd sounds from the neighbour's house at an hour when no decent person would be awake. A woman caught walking alone during the watch could find herself accused of practising dark arts. After all, what kind of person chooses to be awake when everyone else is asleep? Spoiler, the kind who gets a trial. This paranoia ran deep, and it's part of why so many people treated the midnight wake with reverence or fear. It wasn't just an awkward time to be up, it was dangerous, spiritually and physically. The dark wasn't just inconvenient, it was morally ambiguous. Even animals got in on the drama. A dog barking at night. Omen. A cat moving silently across a roof. Witches familiar. A rooster crowing too early. Sign of death. The night had its own set of rules, and they were not great for your anxiety. Now, not everyone thought the wake period was scary. Some saw it as a blessed moment, a time to do what you couldn't do in the chaos of daylight, to pray, to think, to be alone. But for others, it was a time of risk, a time when rules bent and people slipped through the cracks. And maybe that's what made it so powerful, because this little sliver of night tucked between the deep safety of first sleep and the wild creativity of second sleep was a free zone, a loophole in time. You could do what you weren't allowed to do in daylight. You could move differently, think differently, be someone else, for better, or for much, much worse. So next time you wake up at 1:30 a.m, heart pounding for no reason, staring into the dark, maybe it's not your body malfunctioning. Maybe it's your ancestral memory reminding you. This is the hour when the world goes sideways. So there you are, freshly awake from your first sleep. The fire's still throwing off a little warmth. The pig in the corner has turned over, and the room is wrapped in that soft, flickering hush. You're alert, but not fully alive. You're present, but still halfway in the dream about riding a giant squirrel to a bishop's banquet. It's the watch. That odd middle-of-the-night hour where nothing really makes sense, and no one's judging you for whispering to the ceiling beams. And if you happen to share your bed with someone, whether it's your lawful spouse or someone else's exciting mistake, there's a decent chance you're not just using this hour to stoke the fire or say your prayers. Let's talk about midnight intimacy, and why the time between first and second sleep was a sweet spot for love, sex, and second chances. Unlike today, where sleep is often a hard boundary. Don't touch me, I'm unconscious. Medieval sleep was more elastic. It stretched, paused, shifted. That soft wakefulness between sleep phases wasn't seen as a nuisance. It was a gift. And for couples, it was the perfect time for a little one-on-one connection. Because let's be honest, during the day, there wasn't much room for romance. You worked from sun-up to sundown. You were sweaty, cranky, probably covered in something that used to be inside a cow. If you were married, your spouse likely saw you hauling sacks of grain or elbow-deep in laundry. Not exactly aphrodisiac material, but at night, in the hush of the wake hour, when the kids were asleep, the house was dark and the firelight made everyone look like a romantic painting. That's when things happened. Historical sources back this up in some surprisingly frank ways. Medical manuals from the 15th and 16th centuries actually recommended the time between sleeps for marital relations, not just as a fun activity, but as a health practice. According to the wisdom of the time, the body was well rested from first sleep, not too tired from the day's labour, and better prepared for intimacy. Because nothing says romance like the phrase, optimally restored humours. There are even records of physicians advising couples to schedule their intimacy for the watch hour, not because it was the only time available, but because it aligned with the body's natural rhythms. The idea was that after the first deep sleep your vital energies were balanced and, well, everything was working properly. And no, this wasn't all whispered in shame and secrecy. Marital intimacy wasn't taboo, it was expected, encouraged even, especially for the purposes of procreation. Church teachings had a complicated relationship with sex. Spoiler, everything the church did was complicated. But the general vibe was, If you're married and it's night time, you're good. Which brings us to the weirdly specific church rules around sex and sleep. Buckle up, because while intimacy between married couples was sanctioned, the church still tried to micromanage it. There were charts, yes, actual charts, listing acceptable times for marital relations. Mondays, not great. Fridays, forbidden. Religious feast days, you'd better not. During Lent, are you trying to get smote? But the watch hour, the space between sleeps, often flew under the radar. It wasn't part of the official day, it existed in this sort of ecclesiastical grey area, a loophole of warmth and shadows, and many couples used it wisely. Now let's acknowledge a reality of medieval life. Most people slept with other people in the room. Privacy was rare. Entire families, servants, and even the occasional traveller might share a single room or bed. So intimacy during the wake hour required a little creativity. There are references to couples quietly pulling curtains around the bed if they had them, whispering under blankets, or simply waiting until the rest of the room was deep in second sleep. You learn to read the rhythm of a shared room, the snore patterns, the cough cues, the moment when everyone's breath slows in unison and it's safe to reach out a hand. And here's a fringe historical gem. Some couples reportedly used coded lullabies to signal each other during the watch. Think of it as medieval Morse code. You hum a certain tune after the first sleep, and your spouse knows exactly what you're asking for. It's either that or you really want some stew. Not every relationship was sweet and affectionate, of course. Marriage was often transactional, based on land, politics, or social climbing. But even in those cases, intimacy still found a place in the rhythm of sleep. People craved connection, physical, emotional, or otherwise, and the night watch made space for that in a way the daylight didn't. And speaking of emotional connection, it wasn't all just sex. The wake period was often when couples talked. Not small talk either, big talk, life talk. Maybe because the day was so full of chores and duties, the night became the place for tenderness. You're lying there, facing the ceiling beams, half dreaming, half awake. That's when the guard drops. You admit fears, share dreams, make plans, whisper jokes, remind each other that, under all the layers of dirt, exhaustion, and social obligation, there's still a person in there who loves and needs the other. In some ways, the wake hour was relationship glue. Of course, not all the intimacy that happened during the watch was sanctioned. This was also a time when affairs happened, secret rendezvous were arranged, and young lovers who couldn't risk being caught during the day met in barns, behind walls, or in shared sleeping spaces while everyone else was between sleeps. There are entire folk songs about this. Lovers creeping in at midnight and sneaking out before the second sleep is done. And yes, sometimes things got messy. Unplanned pregnancies, scandals, midnight escapes. Let's not pretend the Middle Ages were a Hallmark movie. But what's fascinating is how often the timing of these things revolved around the wake hour. That strange, soft sliver of night where everyone pretends not to hear the creak of a floorboard. There's even a theory that certain folk rituals were designed to take place during this liminal time precisely because it was considered magically potent. The veil between worlds was thin. Spells cast, intentions spoken, or physical unions made during this hour were said to carry extra power. Whether or not you believe that's true, the people living in those moments definitely did. So here's the picture. Two people lying under a pile of wool and fur, bodies warm from sleep, the fire casting gold on the walls. The world is quiet, the mind is softened, the heart is open. And in that space between first and second sleep, between the waking world and the dreaming one, they reach for each other. Not because the day told them to, but because the night allowed it. You're up now, fully this time. Second sleep is over, the day has begun, and all the chickens in your life are making absolutely sure you don't forget it. The cold floor hits your feet with the intensity of a medieval tax collector, and someone in the next room has already started loudly feeding pigs. Welcome to the morning. Hope you enjoyed your 2-part nap, because from here on out, it's all mud and obligations. But somewhere between tugging on your tunic and quietly hating your neighbour's rooster, you might wonder, when did we stop sleeping like this? What happened to the first sleep? The watch? The second sleep? That whole beautifully weird rhythm that let your ancestors drift through the night like soft-limbed time travellers? Why don't you wake up at 1:30 a.m. to whisper prayers, stir the fire, or hum a flirty lullaby? Well, get ready. Because this is where the plot thickens, and electricity enters the chat. Up until the 17th or 18th century, segmented sleep was still very much a thing. People mentioned it in diaries, sermons, medical texts. It was just life. But around that time, something started to shift. Slowly, then suddenly. Cities were growing. Time was becoming money. And the way people slept, it began to tighten. The first villain in our tale? Street lighting. In the late 1600s and early 1700s, European cities started installing oil lamps along public roads. Paris, London, Amsterdam, they all jumped on the trend. Suddenly, the night wasn't pitch black anymore. People could walk, shop, or socialise after sunset without falling into ditches or being devoured by overly ambitious cats. Sounds great, right? But here's the twist. This light changed how people use the night. Instead of going to bed a couple hours after dusk, people stayed up later. They visited friends, went to taverns, even started working after dark. Light stretched the boundaries of the day, and in doing so, compressed the night. If you went to bed later, you had less time for that two-part sleep. First sleep shrank. The watch hour vanished. Second sleep got cut short or skipped entirely. And no one really noticed at first. It was just convenience. But then came the true sleep assassin. The Industrial Revolution. You know, factories, steam, clocks, men yelling about coal. Between the mid-18th and 19th centuries, sleep went from a natural rhythm of night and rest to a logistical problem that gets in the way of productivity. Suddenly people had to wake up at 4:30 a.m. to walk to work at a textile mill, or work a night shift, or take on 2 jobs to survive in crowded urban centres. The New World didn't care about your circadian rhythms, it cared about your punctuality. And employers didn't want workers nodding off at 1 a.m. because their bodies were biologically wired for a nice little watch time nap. So sleep got standardised, pressed into one long, uninterrupted chunk, and if you did wake up at night, that was no longer part of the routine. It was a problem. Even the language changed. Older texts talk about first sleep and second sleep as normal things. By the 19th century, you start seeing the word insomnia more and more. Doctors started to frame nighttime wakefulness as a medical disorder, rather than a natural state. Suddenly, if you woke up at 2 a.m. and sat by the fire thinking about existential dread, you weren't in harmony with the night. You were unwell. And the final nail in the Buffasic coffin, the light bulb. When electric lighting became widespread in the late 1800s and early 1900s, it absolutely nuked our ancestral sleep patterns. For the first time in human history, you could pretend it wasn't nighttime at all. You could flood your home with artificial sunlight, stay up until midnight playing cards or writing poetry or inventing jazz, and then force yourself to sleep until 6:30 a.m. to get to work. You turned the night into an extension of the day, and in doing so you lost the space between sleeps. And once we were all hooked on electric light, things just got worse. Televisions, radios, screens, phones, blue light everywhere. Your eyes are constantly being told it's daytime, even when it's 1 a.m, and you're lying in bed watching a 6-part documentary on competitive cheese sculpting. So now, instead of drifting off after sunset, waking naturally for a quiet, candlelit moment, and returning to bed for a second dreamy voyage, you stay up until you pass out, wake up groggy, and wonder why you feel exhausted even after a full night's sleep. Fun fact, there are dozens of historical diary entries and letters from the 1600s and 1700s that casually mention waking up after first sleep. Not as a complaint, not as a crisis. Just like, after my first sleep I prayed and had a little ale, then returned to bed for the second. No one was reaching for lavender essential oils and YouTube meditations to fix their sleep. They just flowed with it. But by the 20th century, that phrasing basically vanished. It got scrubbed out by the one-size-fits-all 8 hours a night or you're failing at life model. School bells rang early. Factory whistles blew at dawn. And soon enough, the entire Western world internalized the idea that a solid, uninterrupted sleep was the holy grail. And to be fair, some people do fine with monophasic sleep, maybe even great. But the problem is, when everyone is expected to conform to a sleep style that doesn't match their natural rhythm, a lot of people get left behind. Cue the rise of sleep aids, caffeine dependency, chronic fatigue, the whole mattress industrial complex. You can't outsleep evolution, but we sure are trying, and the irony? Segmented sleep never really went away. It's just hiding. Plenty of people today still wake up in the middle of the night. They lie there, frustrated, confused, counting the hours until their alarm. They think something's wrong with them. But maybe the problem isn't the wakefulness. Maybe the problem is what we expect sleep to be. Your body might be perfectly happy doing what it was designed to do. Sleep, wake gently, drift again. It's just your modern schedule that can't handle it. And if you're thinking, wait, could I actually try this? Could I reclaim segmented sleep like it's a vintage lifestyle trend? Oh, you absolutely could. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. That's a question for later. For now, just know this. Your ancestors didn't lie awake at 2 a.m. and panic. They stirred the fire. They whispered. They prayed. They made love. They stared into the dark and let their minds wander. Then they went back to sleep and woke up feeling fine. And maybe that's not lost. Maybe it's just sleeping somewhere inside you. So now you know the electric light bulb basically smacked your natural sleep rhythm in the face with a glowing stick. One moment you were blissfully enjoying your first sleep and maybe whispering a sweet little lullaby during the watch hour. And the next, you're cramming 8 hours into one desperate shot before the 6 a.m. alarm screams for blood. Industrialization may have put humans on the moon, but it also kicked our circadian rhythm straight into a ditch. But here's the part that makes things extra weird. Doctors didn't always think this was a bad thing. In fact, for a long stretch of medical history, segmented sleep wasn't just accepted, it was prescribed. Yes, you read that right. There was a time when physicians, actual, robe-wearing, herb-mixing, Latin-muttering professionals actively encouraged two-phase sleep. Let's rewind to the 16th and 17th centuries. Back then, medicine wasn't exactly the shining beacon of clarity and rigour we expect today. People still believed your health was governed by the 4 humours: black bile, yellow bile, blood and phlegm, aka the most unfortunate Hogwarts house names ever. But even within that messy system, sleep had a very important place. A balanced place. Doctors believed that the night was when the body restored itself, not in some vague spiritual sense, but in a literal, mechanical one. Your humours got rebalanced, your digestion finished its weird medieval journey, your blood calmed down. But they also believed that sleep should come in parts. Why? Because too much uninterrupted sleep was considered dangerous. Seriously. A long unbroken sleep, especially if you slept in past dawn, was believed to cause sluggishness, poor digestion, melancholia, and, in one memorable case, congestion of the brain. It wasn't just superstition. There was a practical edge to it. If you ate a heavy meal in the evening, and in the medieval world supper was usually the big one, doctors thought your body needed time to digest before slipping into a coma. They recommended lying down after eating, but only for a short rest, then getting up, walking a bit, praying, reading, waiting, then going to bed properly for the second sleep. This was seen as optimal, sophisticated, civilized. Some physicians even wrote instructions for watching time, how to behave during it, what to eat, what not to eat, how much light to use. They weren't saying, "Oh no, you woke up at 2 a.m. Take this herbal syrup and panic." They were saying, "Great, let's talk about how to make the most of this." Imagine that today. You show up to your doctor's office, eyes baggy, cheeks hollow, and you say, "Doc, I keep waking up at 2:30 in the morning." And instead of prescribing melatonin and white noise, they say, "Perfect, you're entering your prime cognitive window. Here's a prayer, some dried figs and a candle. Enjoy." Of course, it wasn't all gentle guidance. Some medical texts, particularly from later periods, started turning the tide. As the Enlightenment rolled in and clocks got fancier, some doctors began leaning into the idea of standardized, uninterrupted sleep. But even then, there was still a significant number of scholars, especially in the countryside, who clung to the older rhythm. And it's not just European doctors either. There are non-Western medical traditions that echo the same segmented sleep logic. Traditional Chinese medicine, for instance, links different hours of the night to different organs and functions. Waking up at certain times wasn't random. It had meaning. Maybe your liver was out of balance. Maybe your heart needed a metaphorical hug. In Ayurveda, the ancient Indian system of medicine, the night is also divided into cycles. Sleep is encouraged at certain times and discouraged at others, depending on which energies or doshas dominate. It's like the entire pre-electric world was in quiet agreement. One-size-fits-all sleep is a myth. Now here's a delightful little fringe fact. Leonardo da Vinci supposedly napped in cycles. Every few hours, a short burst of sleep. No long single sleep at all. This system, now called polyphasic sleep, has had brief popularity explosions over the centuries, especially among people who value productivity over, not slowly losing their grip on reality. But whether or not Leo actually lived on 20-minute naps like some kind of Renaissance caffeine goblin is still debated. What's interesting is that the idea keeps popping up, especially during periods when the structure of sleep is up for negotiation. Which brings us to an awkward truth. We're not that far removed from segmented sleep. It wasn't 1,000 years ago. It was barely 150. Some of your great-great-grandparents probably remembered waking after first sleep, sitting by the hearth, or listening to their parents whisper stories in the dark. And yet today, if you mention to someone that you routinely wake up in the middle of the night, they look at you like you've admitted to sleepwalking into traffic. Modern medicine, for all its greatness, has a bit of amnesia when it comes to sleep history. It tends to treat any deviation from the norm as a pathology. You're supposed to sleep for 8 hours. If you don't, something's wrong. Here, take this pill, try this blackout mask. Avoid caffeine, avoid light, avoid joy. But what if your body is doing what it's supposed to do? What if that 2 a.m. wake up is just your body knocking gently and saying, "Hey, remember?" Because the medical community is slowly coming around. In recent years, sleep researchers have started revisiting the concept of segmented sleep, not as a disorder, but as a variation, a loss pattern, one that might actually make more sense for a lot of people. There are even doctors now, brave, coffee-fueled pioneers, who suggest that we should stop calling middle-of-the-night wakefulness insomnia, unless it's actually distressing or disrupting life. Otherwise, it's just a body doing what bodies have done for thousands of years. Which leaves you with a choice. Do you fight the wakefulness, or do you make room for it? Maybe next time you wake up in the middle of the night, instead of counting sheep and praying for unconsciousness, you light a candle. Read a few pages. Write down a dream. Listen to the silence. You don't need to overhaul your life. You don't need to throw out your mattress and start grinding your own grain. But you can start by letting go of the panic, by remembering that once upon a time, this hour wasn't the enemy. It was a friend, a pause, a breathing space. And if you're still not convinced, just remember, for hundreds of years, doctors told people to do this on purpose. Imagine how rested you'd feel if your 2 a.m. wake-up came with a note from your physician saying, "Please enjoy your quiet spiritual interval. Avoid dairy. Stretch your limbs. Return to bed when the soul permits." Sounds better than an Ambien, right? Let's do a little time travel. You're lying in bed, it's 3:11 a.m., and your eyes snap open. Not because you had a dream about your teeth falling out while a medieval monk judged you silently from the corner. No, just because. You're wide awake, you look at your clock, maybe you sigh dramatically, turn over and try to fake sleep. Maybe you pick up your phone, yes, the blue light demon. Or maybe just maybe, you sit there wondering, what is wrong with me? Well, here's the twist. Maybe nothing. Because here's the dirty little secret behind modern sleep culture. What we call insomnia today might just be a side effect of not letting your body sleep the way it was designed to. We've already talked about how segmented sleep used to be normal. You've learned all about first sleep, the watch, second sleep, monks chanting in the dark, and cheeky midnight rendezvous. But let's dig deeper into the modern consequences of abandoning that pattern. Specifically, the fact that a huge number of people now experience sleep disorders that might not be disorders at all. First, let's clarify something. Insomnia is real. For many people, it's a chronic, exhausting, and serious condition. Not just, I had too much coffee, or my cat won't stop parkouring off my ribcage. It can wreck lives, so we're not here to wave that away with candles and nostalgia. But there's another side to this. What if part of the insomnia epidemic is actually the result of forcing ourselves into an unnatural sleep schedule? Think about it. Your body evolved for tens of thousands of years in a world with no artificial light, no standardized timekeeping, and no pressure to sleep in a perfect 8-hour block. For most of human history, you fell asleep a couple hours after sunset, woke up for a bit in the middle of the night, and then drifted back down into second sleep until dawn. No big deal, no shame. Then we electrified everything, created 9-to-5 jobs, decided productivity was the highest virtue, and tried to cram sleep into a box. Now, when people wake up at 2 a.m, in what would have been the natural watch period, they panic. The body's doing what it's always done, and the brain goes, this is failure, this is broken, something's wrong, cue anxiety. And here's where it snowballs. Because the panic about being awake at night is often worse than the wakefulness itself. That anxiety activates your sympathetic nervous system, the one that's great for running from bears and terrible for falling asleep. Your heart rate ticks up, your mind spins, and just like that, you're trapped in a feedback loop. You weren't broken, you were just awake, naturally, but now your panic has created a full-blown sleep crisis. It's called conditioned insomnia, and it's maddeningly common. People lie in bed, terrified of not sleeping, and that fear causes the insomnia. The body says, oh, it's wake time, and the brain shouts, we're all gonna die. But here's the hopeful part. Knowing that segmented sleep is natural can be incredibly liberating, because when you wake up at night and think, oh, right, this is just the watch, you stop fighting, you stop spiraling, you stop turning normal wakefulness into a crisis, and that alone can make it easier to fall back asleep. Let's talk numbers. Modern surveys suggest that around 30 to 35% of adults struggle with insomnia symptoms at least occasionally. That's millions of people lying in the dark wondering what they're doing wrong. And yet, in most of the pre-industrial world, nighttime wakefulness was not just common, it was expected. There are historical documents where people literally describe planning for that middle-of-the-night wake-up. They'd set things aside to do, prayers, letters, reading. No one was crying into their straw mattress because they couldn't stay asleep. They were like, great, time for that poem I've been working on. And that shift in mindset is huge. Today, the moment you're awake at night, the pressure kicks in. You start calculating, if I fall asleep right now, I'll get 4 hours and 12 minutes. We treat sleep like a high-stakes game show, and every minute counts. That kind of mental math, pure sleep poison. But what if you leaned into it? What if, instead of thinking, I've failed, you thought, it's my old friend, the watch. You get up, stretch, maybe read by candlelight, or, a dim warm light lamp. Maybe write a few thoughts down. Journal a dream. Don't check your phone. Don't check the time. Just exist for a little while, and then when you feel ready, you lie back down. Your body knows what to do. There are studies now showing that even short wakeful periods during the night don't significantly reduce sleep quality if you don't panic. People who accept the wake-up and relax through it often feel just as rested as those who sleep straight through. It's not the interruption that breaks you, it's the anxiety. Now, does this mean everyone should start forcing themselves into segmented sleep again? Not necessarily. For some people, the modern monophasic model works fine. For others, experimenting with biphasic sleep can be a revelation. But the bigger idea here is compassion for your own biology. You're not a robot. You're a mammal. And mammals sleep weird. In fact, some animals, like dolphins and certain birds, sleep one half of their brain at a time. Try putting that in your 8-hour schedule. The point is, nature doesn't do standard, and neither should you. So next time you wake up in the middle of the night, try something radical. Don't fight it. Treat it like a gift, a chance to lie quietly, to dream while awake, to whisper into the darkness like your ancestors did, surrounded by the creak of beams, the hush of sleeping bodies, the soft crackle of the dying fire. You're not broken, you're just human. And your sleep, it remembers. So here we are, deep into the night again. The world asleep, the fire a low hum in the corner, and your brain doing that thing where it's halfway between inventing a song about onions and remembering every embarrassing moment from the past 20 years. Classic watch hour behaviour. But now, let's widen the lens, because so far we've focused on medieval Europe. But what if I told you that segmented sleep wasn't just a European phenomenon? That humans all over the world, across continents, climates and belief systems, have been sleeping in shifts for millennia? That's right. Tonight we're going global. Passport not required. Just bring your blanket and an open mind. Let's start in West Africa, where many traditional societies still follow a rhythm of biphasic or polyphasic sleep, meaning 2 or more sleep periods in a 24-hour cycle. In rural farming communities, people often nap in the heat of the afternoon and then sleep again at night, but not necessarily all at once. Instead of long, uninterrupted sleep, the night is broken into periods of rest and wakefulness, often tied to household chores, storytelling, spiritual practices, or keeping the fire going. Sound familiar? It should. That's the same pattern medieval Europeans were following, just in a slightly different climate, with a slightly different soundtrack. More drums, fewer plagues. Then there's Japan, where the concept of inamuru, literally sleeping while present, has been around for centuries. Inamuri isn't segmented sleep in the same structure as first and second sleep, but it reflects a cultural flexibility around rest. People doze on trains, at work, in public places. Sleep isn't confined to one long stretch at night. It's a patchwork. A nap here, a rest there. The idea that a little sleep now is better than no sleep later has long been embedded in Japanese culture. And in pre-colonial Latin America, many indigenous communities practiced polyphasic sleep, often rising for short periods in the night to tend fires, talk quietly, or check on the well-being of others in the household. Colonial records written by Spanish missionaries describe this with a kind of baffled reverence. Why were these people not sleeping straight through? Why weren't they obeying the proper European sleep rules? Because those rules were never universal to begin with. In fact, the rigid, uninterrupted 7 to 9 hour sleep block is an outlier. A modern invention based more on economic efficiency than biology. All over the world, in traditional and indigenous cultures, segmented or flexible sleep cycles have been the norm, and in many places they still are. Take rural parts of the Middle East, where late-night wakefulness isn't just common, it's practically woven into social life. People might rest after dusk, then wake around midnight for food, conversation or prayer, especially during holy months like Ramadan. Even when not fasting, families often keep odd sleep hours that echo segmented rhythms, particularly in areas without full access to electricity. Or hop over to India, where Ayurveda, the country's ancient health system, divides the night into phases ruled by different energies, doshas. According to this view, waking up in the early hours of the morning is not a malfunction. It's when your body is most spiritually and mentally clear. Some Hindu traditions actually encourage waking up during the Brahma Muhurta, roughly 90 minutes before sunrise, to meditate, chant, or connect with divine energy. Again, you've got structured sleep that isn't built around one solid block. Even in modern southern Europe, Echoes of segmented or biphasic sleep survive in the form of the siesta. In countries like Spain, Italy and Greece, the afternoon nap isn't just a delightful indulgence. It's a survival strategy in hot climates and a continuation of an older rhythm. You rest during the heat of the day, go to bed late, and often rise early. Your body gets its sleep in installments. And then there are Arctic communities, where light and darkness can stretch on for months. Here, sleep becomes even more fluid. In the deep winter, some Inuit populations sleep when tired and wake when not, regardless of what the clock says. Polyphasic sleep, where rest comes in short chunks throughout the day and night, becomes normal when the sun doesn't rise or never sets. What all of this points to is a simple, mind-blowing truth. Human sleep isn't supposed to be uniform. It's responsive, contextual. It shifts based on light, temperature, food, stress, danger, community structure, and, cultural beliefs. One long nightly hibernation may work fine in a modern, artificially lit world. But historically, and biologically, our species has been napping, rising, whispering, dreaming, and shifting for tens of thousands of years. So when you find yourself wide awake in the middle of the night, don't fall into the trap of thinking you've failed at sleep. What you're doing might actually be deeply human, maybe even a holdover from a more natural, adaptable way of being. And let's not pretend that our current global culture has totally left segmented sleep behind. Even today, millions of shift workers, nurses, factory workers, emergency responders live on sleep schedules that are anything but standard. Many of them nap in blocks, sleep at odd hours, or drift through cycles that would make a sleep scientist clutch their pearls. And yet their bodies adjust. Maybe not perfectly, but remarkably. And during power outages or extended camping trips, people often report slipping into a two-phase sleep without even realizing it. It's not just a sleep pattern, it's a fallback mode. When modern life steps aside, your brain quietly switches back to factory settings. So if you're lying there in the dark, half awake, with a racing mind and an ache for something ancient, you're not alone. Somewhere in Madagascar, someone else is sitting up during their own watch hour. Somewhere in rural India, someone is lighting a candle to read scripture before returning to second sleep. Somewhere in a crowded Roman apartment, someone is awake, listening to the creak of beams, the hush of breath, the rhythm of the night, and you're all doing the same thing, whether you realize it or not. You're remembering, not with your conscious mind maybe, but in your bones, in your pulse, in that little flicker of awareness that says, this is the hour when the world is softer, stranger, more alive. You're not broken. You're part of a species that never really sleeps all at once. And isn't that kind of beautiful? It's deep night again, where the edges of sleep blur into something looser, dreamier. You're between first and second sleep. The fires burn down to the faintest glow, and outside the wind sounds just a little too human. Not dangerous necessarily, but odd. The kind of night that makes you clutch your blanket a bit tighter and maybe mutter a quick prayer, just in case. Because while we've talked about the watch hour as a time for intimacy, prayer, or low-stakes mischief, it was also seen as something much more mysterious and a little dangerous. Tonight we wander into the world of the midnight prayers and witchy hours, that strange intersection between spirituality and superstition, where the line between sacred and spooky was as thin as parchment. Let's start with the obvious. The medieval world was soaked in religion. Not casually religious, not, I go to church on Christmas religious. We're talking full immersion, cradle to grave. This is the structure of your entire life religious. Everything had a spiritual explanation. Rain was a blessing, illness was punishment, and sleep. That was a liminal state, a chance for the soul to wander, for spirits to visit, and for God, or something darker, to whisper in your ear. Which is why the wakeful hour between sleeps wasn't just seen as a convenient time for reflection. It was considered holy, and potentially dangerous. Let's break it down. first, for the spiritually inclined, this was a time to pray, and not just because you were bored. Monks, as we've already discussed, had their matins and vigils, formal prayers structured around exact hours. But outside the monastery, lay people also developed routines. Many believed that prayer said during the middle of the night had more power. You were alone with God. The distractions of the day were gone. It was just you, the dark, and your soul. Some people kept little prayer books by the bed. Others whispered familiar phrases, counted beads, or simply sat in silence, offering their sleeplessness as a kind of devotion. It wasn't seen as wasted time. If anything, being awake when others were asleep was an opportunity, a private audience with the divine. But the same hour that felt holy could also feel haunted. Because for every candlelit prayer there was someone else staring into the darkness, convinced something was staring back. Enter the witching hour. That fabled time when the boundary between the natural and supernatural gets thin, slippery and extremely flammable. The idea that midnight, or more precisely the time between midnight and 3 a.m., was spiritually active is ancient. It crops up in folklore from across Europe. Witches were said to meet during this time. Demons stirred. Spirits wandered. If you heard 3 knocks and no one was at the door, bad news. If the fire went out suddenly for no reason, worse news. This wasn't just campfire gossip. People built their lives around these beliefs. Beds were sprinkled with holy water, amulets were tucked beneath pillows, cradle charms were hung above infants to protect them from being swapped by fey or dark forces during the night. Some people placed iron tools near the hearth to repel spirits, because iron, for some reason, was thought to scare the pants off the supernatural. And certain types of dreams. Oh, those were watched closely. Dreams during the watch hour were thought to be suspect. We've mentioned before that first sleep dreams were more likely to be considered divine, but second sleep dreams, or anything vivid that occurred in the in-between, had a darker reputation. Those dreams were said to be the work of demons, tricksters, or at best a test of your spiritual defences. In some religious manuals there are instructions on what to do if you're visited by a demon in a dream. It's very detailed. There are prayers to say, postures to assume. It's like a spiritual fire drill. And even if you weren't clergy, people were taught that nighttime was when temptation snuck in most quietly. Through dreams, through thoughts, through that soft little moment when your mind drifted but your eyes stayed open. So yeah, people were a little on edge at 2 a.m. Even the architecture reflected it. In some regions, homes were designed with protective thresholds, doorways with blessed symbols carved into the wood, crosses, saintly initials. In Ireland and parts of Scotland, people painted protective runes near windows and doors to keep out restless spirits during the night. The message was clear. Whatever you are, stay outside until the rooster crows. And speaking of roosters, these poor birds got recruited into the battle between good and evil. It was said that spirits and witches had to disappear at the first crow of the rooster. So if you heard one too early, or not at all, you could be in for a rough night. People genuinely paid attention to which animals stirred when. A dog growling in its sleep. Omen. A horse refusing to lie down in the stable. Absolutely an omen. Basically, your livestock were your paranormal early warning system. Now let's take a quick detour into one of the more bizarre fringe beliefs. Nightmares caused by nocturnal demons called incubi and succubi. These weren't just metaphors for bad dreams. People truly believed in them. An incubus was a male spirit that visited women at night, and a succubus was its female counterpart. They were blamed for sleep paralysis, unwanted dreams, mysterious nighttime injuries, or, you guessed it, unexplainable pregnancies. Because obviously it couldn't have been that guy from the tavern. Must have been a demon. In some regions there were actual rituals to ward them off. Charms to wear, psalms to recite, herbs to burn. People took it seriously because the night was vulnerable. You were asleep. You were open. And in that space between sleeps, your defences were down. It wasn't just superstition. It was how people made sense of the unknown. And let's not forget that for women, especially, being awake at night could be incredibly risky. If you were seen moving about during the watch hour, you could be accused of witchcraft. If someone dreamed about you during the night, that could be taken as evidence. Even midwives, who often worked late into the night, walked a razor-thin line between healer and suspected spellcaster. There's a recorded case from the 15th century Germany where a woman was executed as a witch after her neighbour claimed to see her awake during the night 3 times in 1 week. No spells, no flying broomsticks, just being up at the wrong hour. And yet, for all the fear, people didn't stay hidden. The night watch remained a time of subtle power, of whispered magic and shadowed prayer. For some, it was frightening. For others, freeing. A time when you could be alone with the spirits you loved or feared. And maybe that's still true in some ways. Even now, when you wake at 2:43 a.m. and lie there, feeling that low buzz in the air, that strange stillness. You might not believe in witches or incubi or protective iron scissors under the bed, but you feel something. You know the night is different from the day. You know that hour is not quite right and not quite wrong. It's just other. And maybe that's why your ancestors whispered prayers in the dark, just in case something was listening. So let's say you're not a monk. You're not a sleepy peasant. You're not a goat sharing a bed with a nobleman, and thank goodness for that. No, tonight you're a soldier, or a sentry, or maybe a hardened knight with 50 pounds of chainmail chafing your inner thighs, and you're sleeping in a medieval castle, or a field tent, or on the ground with your back against a tree because your life depends on it. Here's the thing, when you're at war or preparing for it, sleep stops being a luxury. It becomes a tactic. Welcome to the world of tactical segmented sleep, where the watch hour wasn't just a quiet break between dreams, it was a military strategy, a survival mechanism, and sometimes an intentional design in the way armies, guards, and entire cities protected themselves in the dark. Let's start with castles. If you're sleeping inside one, first of all, nice work, you've avoided the plague and risen high in the world. But also, you're never really sleeping alone. Even nobles had to deal with the weird nighttime rhythms of castle life. The stone walls echoed every footstep. The wind moaned like a ghost with allergies. And every night the guard would take up watch shifts, rotating turns on the battlements or at the gates, eyes scanning for signs of enemies, fires, or your local drunk minstrel trying to climb the tower again. The phrase standing watch comes directly from this world. You didn't sleep all night. You slept in shifts, often aligned with natural periods of wakefulness. One soldier might take the first half of the night, your standard first sleep window, then be relieved around midnight or 1 a.m. by someone else. That second person would then finish their duty as the camp stirred for the day. This wasn't accidental. It worked with the segmented sleep rhythm, not against it. Because even outside of war, people naturally woke up in the middle of the night. So what better time to schedule a patrol? But in battle zones, or when an attack was expected, things got serious. Soldiers would sleep in short bursts, or not at all during tense nights. They might be ordered to rest fully during the day, only to rise and stand ready during the night, precisely because they knew that the enemy also understood the psychology of sleep. Most raids and surprise attacks happened in the dead of night, especially during that lull between first and second sleep, when people were less alert, firelight was low, and defences were softest. Sleep was a weakness, and everyone knew it. So how did people adapt? Well, some medieval camps ran like highly organised sleep factories. Think of a Roman legion or a well-funded crusader force. They had guard rotations down to a science. You weren't just told, get some rest. You were assigned specific hours, positions, and shift lengths. They even had systems in place to wake you up on time, usually involving someone shaking your shoulder with all the tenderness of a bag of bricks. This tactical sleep management wasn't just for guards or soldiers. Towns and cities had their own version. Urban centres had night watches, made up of citizens, constables, or hired guards who patrolled after dark. Their job? To keep peace, prevent fires, catch criminals, and most importantly, watch for signs of invasion or rebellion. These guys weren't just bored insomniacs. They were part of a security grid built on top of humanity's natural sleep rhythms. And here's something wild. Even siege warfare accounted for segmented sleep. Picture it. You're a soldier inside a city under siege. You can't sleep all night, not really. You sleep in spurts, grabbing a few hours here and there between horn blasts, fire arrows, and someone yelling, "They're coming through the west wall." And you bet your enemies know this. Many historical accounts describe timed nighttime attacks, launching surprise assaults during the watch hour, when defenders were more likely to be up but not fully organised, not groggy but not fresh either, in that in-between, that moment of maximum vulnerability. So instead of trying to force full sleep, soldiers were trained to nap like professionals. Sleep became strategic. If you could rest during the day, then remain alert during the watch hour, you were more useful, less dead. The military concept of guard duty or fire watch stems directly from this era. It's not modern, it's ancient. Sleep wasn't one continuous cycle, it was a sequence of opportunities, managed around what the enemy might be doing while your side was drooling into its hay pillow. And let's not pretend civilians were much different. In times of unrest, riots, bandit activity, rumours of invasion, entire villages would organise nighttime watch rotations. You might sleep from sundown to midnight, then wake and stand guard with a few neighbours until 2 a.m, then pass the torch, literally to the next group and go back to sleep for your second round. If that sounds suspiciously like biphasic sleep, that's because it was. But with spears and a little more anxiety, even households use this logic. In noble homes, servants or guards would sometimes be instructed to check locks, secure windows and patrol halls during the night. Not once, regularly, just in case. That watch hour wasn't just for prayer or intimacy. It was when the household reset its defences, and anyone with something worth stealing, or someone worth assassinating, made sure they had someone awake in the dark. Let's not forget naval crews either. Sailors on medieval ships divided their time into watches, usually 4-hour blocks where some crew slept while others worked. Again, it mimics segmented sleep. You'd rest for a few hours, rise and work through darkness, then sleep again when your shift ended. On long voyages, sailors learned to sleep whenever and wherever they could. And when the ship's movement, creaking, and constant danger made restful sleep impossible, you learned to nap like a monk in a thunderstorm. And now here's a niche. Glorious historical fact. Some military camps practice something called staggered sleep, where even within a group of sleeping soldiers, a few people were always semi-awake, lying down, resting, but ready to rouse the rest at the first sign of trouble. A human alarm system. And it worked because, again, people expected to wake up naturally in the night. They didn't see that as a failure. They saw it as a feature. And yes, even the Romans had a version of this. Their night was divided into 4 watches: prima vigilia, secunda vigilia, tertia vigilia, and quarta vigilia. Each watch was about 3 hours long, and someone was always awake, always watching, always waiting. So while today we mostly sleep in locked houses with alarm systems and too many pillows, your ancestors slept defensively. Their segmented sleep wasn't just biological, it was tactical. It was structured around danger. And maybe deep down that's part of why some people still feel uneasy when they wake in the middle of the night. Your body remembers. Your ancestors were on edge during the watch hour, not because they were neurotic, but because being awake might have saved their life. If the fire went out, if the enemy arrived, if the barn caught fire, you needed someone alert. So the next time your eyes snap open at 1:57 a.m, don't panic. Just smile, roll over and say to yourself, the perimeter is secure. Alright, so by now, you've fought off imaginary night demons, patrolled castle walls, whispered forbidden lullabies to your secret lover, and prayed through the witching hour. You're starting to get the vibe. The medieval night was a busy, deeply human space, not just a blackout void of unconsciousness. But here's a twist we haven't leaned into yet. You were almost never alone when you slept. That's right. Tonight we slip beneath the wool blankets of history to explore something deeply intimate, awkward, and very, very medieval: communal sleeping. Let's start with a little mental picture. You're a travelling merchant in the 14th century. You've just arrived at an inn after 4 days on the road, your boots smell like bad cheese, and your joints sound like a wooden ship in a storm. You pay for a bed, and the innkeeper leads you to a straw mattress already occupied by 2 other people. Surprise! Because sleeping alone, that was for the very rich. For nearly everyone else, beds were shared. Not just between spouses or families, but between friends, strangers, guests, servants, apprentices, guards, children, and sometimes even livestock. Let's dig into that. In peasant households, there was usually 1 bed, maybe 2 if you were fancy. Parents and small children would sleep together for warmth. Older kids might sleep on benches or near the hearth. Extended family, farmhands, or servants, they'd grab a spot wherever there was room, next to the fire, under the table, or in your bed if you were out milking cows and they got there first. And it wasn't weird, it wasn't scandalous, it was just how people slept, in groups, often tangled together like puppies. Not for affection, though that happened too, but for warmth and space conservation. Now imagine that during the watch hour. You wake up after your first sleep, you shift under the blankets, someone's elbow is in your rib, there's a knee suspiciously close to your lower back. You whisper to your spouse, trying not to wake your uncle. Someone else coughs and turns over. You hear a servant softly tiptoeing to check on the fire. It's a whole sleepy ecosystem, a shared world, and somehow it worked. This was normal across classes. Even royalty didn't always sleep alone. Kings and queens might have enormous beds, some the size of modern bedrooms. But they often slept with ladies-in-waiting, pages, or even political guests. Not because they were particularly cosy, but because shared sleep was a sign of trust and intimacy, even in politics. Enter the wonderfully weird concept of the bedfellow. In medieval and early modern Europe, to be someone's bedfellow didn't automatically mean romance. It meant literal bed sharing. You could be a nobleman sharing with his advisor, a young noble sharing with an older mentor, 2 travelling craftsmen sharing a tavern mattress to save coin. It was seen as social bonding. In fact, being chosen as a bedfellow could be a sign of political favour. Kings sometimes shared their beds with favoured courtiers, again, not necessarily romantically, but as a gesture of closeness. You want to show someone they're trusted. Invite them to sleep next to you, preferably without snoring. This idea still lingers in language. Think of the phrase strange bedfellows, which means unlikely allies, not necessarily people spooning at midnight. That phrase comes directly from this era, when political or social alliances were often sealed over shared sleep. And let's not forget travellers. When inns were full, it was perfectly common for strangers to sleep in the same bed, especially in rural areas. You'd arrive late, the innkeeper would shrug, and you'd be bundled in next to someone from 3 counties over, who may or may not have bathed this month. There's a 17th century English travel diary that calmly describes sharing a bed with a farmer who smelled of old hay and virtue, which honestly could be a candle scent today. Of course, not everyone loved this. There are also plenty of complaints, people snoring, talking in their sleep, thrashing, or yes, stealing the covers. One medieval Frenchman even wrote a poem about how his bedmate hogged all the blankets and then rolled over to expel a wind most cruel, some things never change. But if you're thinking this all sounds terribly unhygienic, you're not wrong. Beds weren't changed daily. Bathing was infrequent. Fleas and lice were standard bedmates. If you got lucky, your bedfellow was just smelly. If you weren't, they were ill. Or worse, carrying something. There are whole medieval laws about not lying too close to the sick, especially in shared spaces like almshouses or monastic dormitories. But again, space was limited. Options were few. Now, let's peek at monastic communities, where sleep was a blend of discipline and practicality. Monks often slept in dormitory-style halls arranged in rows. They rose together for midnight prayers, matins, then returned for second sleep, all without speaking a word. Privacy? 0. But it reinforced the values of humility, obedience, and the shared rhythm of faith. Even here, shared sleeping had meaning. You weren't just part of a faith, you were part of a living body, moving, sleeping, and praying in sync. Kind of like synchronized swimming, but with more chanting and fewer sequins. But the best communal sleep setups, the great halls. During festivals, weddings, or political gatherings, nobles and their households would crash together in enormous rooms. Guests, servants, guards, and even jesters would all stake out floor space, laying out straw beds, cloaks, or if they were lucky, actual mattresses. People would eat, drink, dance, and then collapse in place. It was like a medieval slumber party with better wine and worse plumbing. So what happens to segmented sleep in this setting? It still thrives. Because whether you're sleeping next to family, fellow soldiers, or a man who smells like virtue, your body still follows its natural rhythm. First sleep, watch, second sleep. And in communal environments, the watch period became a time not just for private moments, but for shared experience. People talked, whispered, told stories, passed food, checked the fire. You might sit up and find your grandmother already awake, softly spinning wool in the dark. You might wake to the sound of quiet gossip between two servants on the other side of the hearth, or to someone not whispering and being firmly shushed. In some households, the watch hour was when dreams were shared aloud, a kind of sleepy debrief where people interpreted symbols and tried to guess what the visions meant. It was a social moment, a brief window of wakeful connection before sliding back into the quiet world of second sleep. And while modern bedrooms are often private fortresses, locked doors, white noise machines, blackout curtains, the idea of shared sleep hasn't vanished entirely. College dorms, hostels, military barracks, campsites, sleepovers. There are still times when we bunch together, fall asleep surrounded by noise, and wake up to someone snoring like a wood chipper in the corner. So here's the bedtime truth bomb. Sleep was never meant to be solitary. Not all the time, not for all people, not in all places. For most of human history, sleep was communal, noisy, and interrupted, but also comforting. You weren't alone in the dark. You were part of a warm, shifting quilt of humanity, all breathing together in the hush between days. And maybe, just maybe, when you wake up at night and feel a strange loneliness you can't quite name, it's not just about sleep. It's about company. You're back in the dark again. The hour is quiet, still, thick with that velvety weight that only happens when the world is asleep. You stir in bed. No strange elbows jabbing your ribs tonight. Just silence. And your thoughts stretching their legs. And maybe, in this soft in-between moment, you wonder, what exactly was everyone dreaming about during all these first and second sleeps? Because tonight, we're peeling back the blankets of consciousness to explore something surreal and profoundly revealing. Medieval dreams, what people saw, what they believed those visions meant, and how the segmented rhythm of their sleep might have shaped them in ways we're only beginning to understand. First of all, let's get something out of the way. Medieval folks took dreams very seriously, like prophecy-level serious. Sure, some people thought dreams were just the product of bad cheese or a bloated liver, but even then they'd be like, okay, but what kind of cheese? Because that could change the message. Dreams were considered messages from God, signs from the saints, warnings from demons, or glimpses into the future. And the idea that dreams had meaning wasn't a fringe belief. It was mainstream theology. Church fathers wrote entire treatises on dreams. Monks recorded their night visions with almost obsessive care. There were even dream dictionaries, filled with symbolic interpretations. You dreamed about fish. That's a sign of piety. You dreamed about falling. Definitely pride. You dreamed about flying. Maybe lay off the mead. And yes, people noticed the timing of dreams. There was this widespread belief that when you dreamed mattered as much as what you dreamed. Medieval thinkers, drawing on earlier Greek and Roman sources, often divided dreams into 3 categories, based partly on their timing during the night. 1. First sleep dreams. These were thought to be more chaotic, tied to digestion and earthly concerns. If you dreamed during this phase, it might just be your body processing food or physical discomfort. Still meaningful maybe, but less divine. Second sleep dreams. These were the good stuff, seen as clearer, more spiritual, more likely to contain visions, omens, or messages from beyond. The theory was that by this point the body was quiet, the mind was clean, and the soul was ready to receive whatever higher power wanted to drop into your subconscious. 3. Watch hour visions. Not quite sleep, not quite waking. These were the strangest, and often the most potent. Lying half awake, half dreaming, people would report hearing voices, seeing figures, or slipping into brief visionary trances. Not fully asleep, not fully conscious. This was liminal dreaming, and it terrified and fascinated everyone who experienced it. Now here's the kicker. Some scholars today think the structure of segmented sleep may have enhanced dreaming, especially lucid dreaming. That is, being aware that you're dreaming while it's happening. Why? Because waking up between sleeps creates this rare moment where you can remember your dreams clearly, and then drift back into sleep with intent. Modern lucid dreamers actually use this same technique today. It's called wake back to bed. You wake up for 30 to 60 minutes, then return to sleep, increasing the chances of becoming conscious inside the dream. Sound familiar? Yeah. Medieval people were basically accidental dream hackers, and they used it. There are reports of people praying to have a certain kind of dream before returning to second sleep. Others believed that if you asked a saint for guidance during the watch hour, you might receive your answer in the dream that followed. Monks, mystics, and everyday folks all practice this, often keeping dream journals of a sort, scratched-down notes, drawings, or whispered retellings to a spouse or fellow bedfellow in the night. Some even turn their dreams into public declarations, sharing them with village priests or local leaders if they felt the message was urgent or divine. But not all dreams were welcome. Remember those nighttime demons we talked about? Incubi, succubi, and their assorted creepy cousins. These beings were blamed for dreams that were, let's just say, intense, sensual, disturbing, or flat out terrifying. A particularly vivid or shameful dream might be interpreted as a spiritual attack, especially if it happened during that suspicious liminal zone between sleeps. This created a tricky grey area. How do you know if your dream is from God or from something darker? Cue the confessor. In monasteries and parishes, confessors would sometimes help interpret dreams, not to offer therapy, but to assess spiritual danger. Did the dream reflect sin? Was it a divine test? Was it a warning you needed to act on? Or were you just a little gassy? There's even record of a 12th century nun who confessed a recurring dream about being chased by a bear. The priest's advice? More fasting. Not sure how that helps, but medieval logic never lets a bear off the hook. Dreams weren't just about personal insight. They had social weight. In some communities, a prophetic dream could spark real-world action. People might change plans, cancel a journey, avoid a town, dreaming of a fire, a warning to the village, dreaming of snakes, trouble in the crops, dreaming of your dead uncle staring silently at you from across a field. Yeah, you were expected to do something about that. Maybe a mass, maybe a pilgrimage, maybe just digging up the backyard to check for cursed bones. You know, just in case. And remember how we said people didn't sleep alone? That meant dreams were shared, discussed, debated. During the wake hour after first sleep, a person might quietly recount a dream to someone lying nearby. These retellings weren't always private. In fact, dreams could become communal stories, retold to neighbours, woven into sermons, even adapted into folk tales or songs. They were part of the social glue, like medieval Reddit threads, but with fewer memes and more visions of glowing deer giving marriage advice. Some of the most powerful dreams recorded in the Middle Ages came from women, especially mystics, saints and visionaries. Hildegard of Bingen, Julian of Norwich, Marjorie Kempe. These women described dreams so vivid and complex they were eventually written down, preserved and studied centuries later. Many of their visions came during the quiet night hours, times when their minds were still and the world allowed them a voice. Which brings us to a delicious scholarly debate. Did segmented sleep make people more spiritual? Some historians argue yes. The quiet, candlelit space between sleeps gave people time to reflect, pray, or interpret dreams. Others push back, saying the structure didn't necessarily make people more spiritual. It just gave them more space to notice what was already inside them. Either way, one thing is clear. Dreams mattered, and the rhythm of first sleep, wake hour, second sleep created the perfect container for those dreams to flourish. So maybe next time you wake at 2:30 a.m, don't rush back under the covers. Sit with the images. Let your mind wander. Light a candle if you want. Jot something down. Not because it has to mean something, but because that middle space, that in-between, is where so many hidden things come to the surface. Who knows what your dream will say? Maybe it's a prophecy. Maybe it's indigestion. Maybe it's just your brain throwing a costume party and inviting all your unresolved issues. Whatever it is, just know you're not the first to wake in the night and wonder. So by now, your body has eased into the rhythm. You've adapted to first sleep, stretched yourself into the watch, and dipped back into second sleep like some kind of time-travelling nap wizard. The monks would be proud. The chickens? Less so. They're still annoyed you haven't fed them yet. But tonight, let's turn our attention to something you may not have thought about in all this dreamy, segmented glory. How exactly did the body keep time before clocks? I mean, how did people know when it was time to go to bed, to rise for matins, to change the guard, or return to sleep after the watch? Because remember, you didn't have a glowing screen showing 2:17 a.m. You didn't tap your Fitbit to check your REM cycles. You had no idea what REM cycles even were, but you did have the moon, the stars, firelight, and a surprisingly accurate internal sense of rhythm. Tonight, we're diving into pre-modern timekeeping, the subtle, earthy, oddly precise ways people track the hours in the middle of the night. Let's start with the basics. Daylight? Easy. You wake when the sun rises, or when the rooster loses its mind. But night? Night's trickier. Nighttime clocks, especially before the 14th century, were rare, expensive, and pretty unreliable. So how did people measure time in the dark? Firelight. One of the oldest and simplest methods, the fire clock. You light a candle or oil lamp and mark time by how far it burns. Some candles were designed with metal balls inserted into the wax at hourly intervals. When the wax melted, the balls dropped with a plink into a metal base. Instant alarm clock. And yes, that's a real thing. Monasteries in medieval China, India, and even some parts of Europe used incense clocks or marked candles to signal prayer times. Want to wake up for matins at midnight? Light a candle with 4 balls spaced 15 minutes apart and try not to knock it over in your sleep. Of course, this only worked if you were indoors and not in a breeze strong enough to age you 10 years. So out in the fields or on long journeys, people relied on the stars. Yep, the literal night sky was their clock. Not in an abstract poetic sense. People learned how to read the stars like a schedule. The Big Dipper, for example, rotates around Polaris over the course of the night. Its position could help a farmer, sailor or monk estimate the time within a pretty decent margin. One old English rhyme goes, "When the dipper pours, the night is done. If it lifts, the sleep's begun." And then there were the bells. If you lived near a monastery or church, the tolling of bells was your soundtrack. The canonical hours, matins, lauds, prime, etc., were announced by bells rung by monks who, ironically, often used candle or water clocks themselves. If you heard 3 slow bells at midnight, time for matins. Heard 1 sharp bell at dawn, time to pretend you're not still half asleep. These bells didn't just tell time, they structured it. For religious communities, each bell wasn't just a signal, it was a summons, a call to prayer, a reminder that time wasn't just passing, it was holy, And in villages, bells also warned of fires, attacks, or deaths. So if you were up during the watch hour and heard bells that weren't on schedule, you bolted upright. In households, the watcher, usually an older member of the family or someone with insomnia before it was a diagnosis, might tend the fire, watch the stars, or literally sit and listen for subtle environmental cues, dogs barking, wind shifting, the way a candle flickered. Some of this was superstition, but some of it, genuine environmental awareness, honed by necessity. Now, let's get weird for a moment. In some traditions, especially in Eastern Europe and Scandinavia, people believed that bodies themselves told time. Like, literally, there was a belief that certain organs woke up at certain times of night. Sound familiar? It overlaps eerily with traditional Chinese medicine, which maps internal organs to 2-hour windows in the 24-hour cycle. Wake up between 1 and 3 a.m. That's your liver doing important detox work. Between 3 and 5 a.m., your lungs are clearing themselves. This body clock theory wasn't universal, but it was popular in places where sleep was closely tied to health and night wakefulness wasn't seen as dysfunction. It was a signal from your body, maybe telling you to pray or hydrate or stop eating raw onions after dark. And then you had the auditory cues of the natural world. Owls, roosters, dogs, crows. People learned to associate specific animal sounds with specific parts of the night. In many folk traditions, the second crow of the rooster, not the first, signalled the approach of dawn, which meant if you were lying awake during the watch hour and you heard that first strangled roar, you had a solid 90 minutes to wrap up your prayers, check the fire, and slide back into second sleep. Also fun. Some villages actually designated human night watchers, whose job was to walk the streets and announce the time. 3 o'clock and all's well, they'd call out in the cold. Part clock, part town security system, part medieval white noise. Some of them even had rhymes for each hour. 1 of the clock and still and clear, no flames or thieves draw near. 2 of the clock and windy and wet, keep your shutters closed and your hearth well set. Was it effective? Questionable. But it gave people a sense of continuity, that someone was awake, watching, anchoring the night. Which brings us to a deeper truth. The watch hour wasn't just about what you did, it was about when you did it. Medieval people didn't need precise time down to the minute. They needed rhythm, signals, natural cues, a flow that aligned with their biology. In a weird way, it might have been easier for them. You weren't expected to wake at 7:03 a.m, catch the 7:35 train, and log into Zoom by 8:15. You woke with the light, moved with the sun, and, during the night, you trusted your body and your surroundings to tell you when it was time to rise or return to sleep. Compare that to now. We've got smartwatches that beep, phones that buzz, apps that track your heartbeat while judging your sleep hygiene. And yet we're more confused about sleep than ever. Maybe because we stopped listening, not just to our bodies, but to the quiet clocks of the world, the way a flame bends, the angle of the moon, the call of the night bird, the breath of the wind slipping under the door. Those were your alarms once. And maybe, if you're still for a moment tonight, they can be again. All right. You've made it this far, through haunted night vigils, fire clocks, dream prophecy, and the occasional sleep-adjacent goat. And by now, something is probably tugging at your modern, screen-glazed brain. If segmented sleep was so natural, when exactly did we stop? Why don't you, me, and the rest of the world still wake up at 2 a.m. to whisper prayers, rearrange the firewood, or start working on your experimental medieval zither compositions? Tonight, let's unpack what might be the most jarring part of this whole history, the collapse of segmented sleep, and how it happened so fast, you probably didn't even see it coming. First off, a reminder. Segmented sleep wasn't niche. It wasn't just monks and rural peasants wandering around in itchy wool. It was standard human behaviour across cultures for centuries, which means something pretty dramatic had to happen to nudge billions of people off that rhythm. That something came wrapped in glowing filaments, the scent of coal smoke and the clang of factory bells. Welcome to the Industrial Revolution. Picture this. The year is 1800 something. You're living in a rapidly growing city. Maybe Manchester, maybe Pittsburgh, maybe Paris. Doesn't matter. What does matter is that the sun no longer dictates your schedule. The factory does. It starts early, ends late, and doesn't care if your circadian rhythm thinks it's watch hour. Suddenly your body isn't the boss anymore. The clock is. Before, you went to sleep when the sun dipped low, woke in the middle of the night for the watch, then slept again until dawn. Now, you're cramming sleep into the narrow window between the end of your shift and the start of the next one. That precious wakeful hour between sleeps, gone. Not because your biology changed, but because capitalism doesn't nap. Enter the electric light bulb. Sure, oil lamps and candles had been slowly eating away at the natural rhythm for centuries, but they were expensive and inconvenient. Only the rich burned the midnight oil regularly. But when electric lighting hit homes and factories in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, that was the knockout punch. Now, nighttime wasn't dark anymore. You could read, work, socialise and travel. Long after the sun went down, entire cities glowed. Productivity soared. So did entertainment. And slowly, imperceptibly, our relationship with night shifted. We no longer saw the night as something to surrender to. It became something to conquer. Sleep, once sacred and natural, began to feel like a problem to be managed. Shortened, streamlined. 8 hours, preferably unbroken, stacked neatly at the end of your workday like a recharge timer. Wake up, work, repeat. Which brings us to a curious moment in history, the invention of insomnia. Obviously, humans have always struggled with sleep. But before the modern era, waking up at 2 a.m. wasn't considered abnormal, it was expected. You weren't failing to sleep, you were simply in the watch. But now, with the rise of industrial timekeeping and artificial light, that midnight wake-up was rebranded. It became a symptom, a problem, a disorder. Early 20th century medical journals began describing middle-of-the-night wakefulness as a pathology. People who woke between 1 and 3 a.m., a thing humanity had been doing for literal millennia, were told they were sick, anxious, unstable. Doctors began prescribing treatments, sleeping powders, sedatives. Later, barbiturates, tranquilizers, pills with names that sound like discontinued candies. The body hadn't changed, but the expectation had. And expectations are powerful. Once society started believing that normal sleep meant 8 hours straight, with no interruptions, people who did wake in the night started to feel anxious. That anxiety triggered more wakefulness, which triggered more anxiety. And boom, you're lying there at 2 a.m, not gently watching the coals burn low, but spiralling because you have a meeting at 8 and your brain won't shut up. Sound familiar? Let's talk numbers for a second. The concept of segmented sleep as historical fact didn't even return to mainstream awareness until the 1990s, when historian Roger E. Kirch published a paper full of journal entries, court records and diary fragments that clearly described first sleep and second sleep as totally normal, everyday concepts. It was there all along, just hidden under layers of modern assumptions. The moment a Kirch published his work, sleep scientists lit up like caffeinated owls. Suddenly, people who thought they had sleep problems were asking, "Wait, you're telling me waking up at 2 a.m. isn't a crisis?" Yes, that's exactly what he was saying. And for many, that one realization changed everything. Because if middle-of-the-night wakefulness is normal, not a failure, not an illness, not a disorder, then maybe the stress is unnecessary. Maybe the problem isn't your body. Maybe the problem is the expectation. And expectations, those can be unlearned. To be fair, some people thrive on monophasic sleep. They go down at 11, rise at 7, and feel amazing. Good for them. But others? They lie awake at night, convinced something's broken. They don't realize their bodies are just trying to remember how they used to sleep, how everyone used to sleep. And now the pendulum is swinging again. Modern researchers are exploring segmented sleep, not as a quaint historical relic, but as a viable option for people struggling with modern insomnia. Some sleep therapists are actually prescribing a return to biphasic rhythms, especially for people with early morning wakefulness that doesn't respond to conventional treatment. And here's the wildest part. When people stop panicking about that middle of the night wake-up, they often fall asleep faster, sleep deeper, and feel more rested overall. Not because they're fixing something, but because they're finally allowing something that was never broken. So where does that leave us? In the glow of our 24-hour world, it's tempting to see the night as dead time, a pause in the productivity machine. But for most of human history, it was a living space, a quiet, breathing moment between two sleeps, filled with thoughts, prayers, creativity, and sometimes the best conversation you'd have all day. And maybe that's the point. You don't need to renounce technology, smash your phone with a hammer, or start sleeping in straw. But you can choose to treat your wakefulness with gentleness, with curiosity, with the understanding that for thousands of years your ancestors did exactly the same thing and felt no shame about it. You're not broken, you're just remembering. It's late, or maybe it's early. Hard to tell really, because time's lost its grip a little, hasn't it? That's what happens when you ease into the natural rhythms of first sleep, the watch, and second sleep. You're floating now, in a place that feels both ancient and familiar. But we're not quite done yet, because there's one more layer to this whole medieval sleep experience we haven't peeled back. What people actually did during the watch hour, beyond prayer, dreams, and the occasional spooky owl. Yes, it was a time of quiet reflection, but also, it was prime time for creativity, problem solving, and genuinely weird, sometimes brilliant ideas. That's right, you too might have your best thoughts at 2:47 a.m, and guess what? So did your ancestors. Let's set the mood. You've had your first sleep. You wake naturally, body calm, the night pressing gently against the walls of your little home. There's no rush, no alarms, just time, space, a kind of mental clarity that only exists in that post-sleep, pre-sleep space. The air is still, the fire's low, and miraculously, no one's talking to you. This, right here, is your secret laboratory. And historically, people used it well. There are tons of records, letters, memoirs, even religious texts that describe the watch hour as a time for thinking things through. Decisions, worries, projects, that business plan for finally opening a better bakery than Gerard down the lane, the idea for a new water wheel, the lines of a song you want to write, or the passive-aggressive poem you've been crafting in your head for your brother-in-law. Problem-solving was a huge part of this nightly ritual, and it makes sense, right? You're rested enough that your brain isn't foggy, but not so alert that you're overwhelmed. There are no distractions, no kids asking where their socks are, no carts rattling down the road, no one yelling about taxes or wolves. In that soft nocturnal clarity, people could finally hear themselves think. Some of the most influential thinkers of the past described having their best ideas at night, either in dreams or during the wakeful middle. St. Augustine wrote about his struggles with faith and morality while lying awake between sleeps. Petrarch claimed some of his poetic inspiration came in the silent hours. Even Benjamin Franklin, a segmented sleeper himself, used the night to write and reflect, often stark naked, sitting in a drafty room because Ben was just built different. This was also a time for writing letters, especially love letters. Oh yes, there are surviving love notes from medieval couples that reference the quiet hour between sleeps, when their thoughts turned to their beloved. It wasn't dramatic Shakespearean swooning. It was cosy, intimate. "I woke and thought of you again," one letter reads. "The fire was low and I wished you were near to warm my feet. Eat your heart out, Hallmark." But not all nocturnal creativity was sentimental. Some of it was practical. Farmers would sketch planting calendars. Bakers made notes about flour quality. Cooks tinkered with recipes. Blacksmiths reviewed repairs. It's like the 2 a.m. brain had a slightly different tone. Not panicked, but precise. Ideas flowed more slowly, yes, but more deeply. Less chaotic brainstorming, more elegant puzzle solving. This still happens today, by the way. Modern research has shown that the brain during hypnagogia, that half-sleep state between waking and dreaming, is wildly fertile. Famous modern creators like Salvador Dali and Thomas Edison actually tried to trap themselves in that state, holding objects that would fall and wake them up just as they started to slip into dream logic. They claimed that moment, right before the plunge, was where their best ideas came from. Well, medieval people didn't need tricks. Their segmented sleep gave them that moment naturally, and many used it to great effect. Artists, for instance, might rise to add detail to a sketch or mentally compose a new work. Illiterate folk would still build songs or tales during this time, rehearsing them aloud to be shared later by firelight. Think of it as a personal podcast, but whispered into the dark and featuring more riddles about chickens. And it wasn't just the elite or the clever. Regular people, your standard fishmonger or candle maker, often expected this hour to bring them clarity. There's this lovely line from a 15th century English almanac. "Take thy waking with patience, for God doth speak oft in silence." It doesn't mean a booming voice from above. It means that the quiet mind, the gentle moment of wakefulness, is when you sometimes finally hear the answer you've been too busy to notice. Also, yes, some people use the watch hour for chores. Let's not romanticize it too much. You might get up and stir the stew pot, stoke the fire, check on an ailing cow, mend a torn tunic. But even these tasks could feel different in the soft hum of the watch. There was no rush, no noise, no one watching. It was labour, but peaceful. And let's not forget the intimate conversations. This is something we don't often think about now. But in shared beds or cramped homes, the watch hour was when real talk happened. Not over dinner, not during work, but in the quiet space between sleeps. Couples talked, families whispered, friends laid side by side and shared their hopes, their worries, their dumbest ideas. It was a time of emotional honesty, where the day's defences dropped and people could just be with each other. The things we now seek from therapy, late-night podcasts, midnight text, those soft, vulnerable little exchanges that sneak past our armour. Yeah, that's what the medieval watch hour offered, every night. And when they were done, they went back to sleep. That's the beauty of it. No pressure, no productivity goal, no guilt if nothing got done. The watch wasn't a second shift, it was a pause, a breath, a space. Some people would simply lie there thinking. Others would sit by the fire and listen to the wind. Some would knit, write, pray, pace, or stare into the coals and imagine a life slightly different than their own. You don't need a stone cottage or flickering candlelight to do the same. You just need to stop fighting the wakefulness. When you wake up in the night, maybe don't groan and grab your phone. Maybe just lie there. Let your mind drift. Don't chase sleep. Don't fight thought. Let your inner voice uncurl. And who knows, you might finally solve that problem that's been haunting you for weeks. You might remember a line you've been trying to write. You might hear the gentle whisper of your own voice, speaking more clearly than it ever does at noon. Not every night needs to be a productivity miracle, but every night can offer a tiny window into your quietest brilliance. You've wandered through candlelit monasteries, dirt-floored cottages, crowded-in beds, and the soft spaces between dreams. But tonight, let's stretch our gaze wider, out past medieval Europe, past the old villages and winding alleys. Because segmented sleep isn't just an odd chapter in Western history, it's something that still exists. That's right. You may have thought this whole first sleep, second sleep thing was buried in the past, some kind of quaint relic forgotten in the age of espresso shots and 2 a.m. doom scrolling. But the truth is, it never fully disappeared. In some corners of the world, people never stopped sleeping this way. Let's start in rural Madagascar. There's a word in Malagasy, Torimaso Roa, which literally means 2 sleeps. In certain communities, people still divide their night into 2 distinct segments, with a calm period of wakefulness in between. They rise, tend to chores, visit neighbours, or simply sit and talk in hushed voices before returning to bed. It's not considered strange. It's normal, expected even. And here's the kicker. These are communities without widespread access to electricity. So, while we've been reprogramming our bodies with LED screens and blue light insomnia, they've just kept doing what humans have always done. Falling asleep with the sun, rising for a little while, then slipping back into dreams before the cock crows. Now slide over to parts of Nigeria where a similar pattern exists. Among the Tiv people, anthropologists have observed 2 sleep segments, separated by a quiet, wakeful period in the night. People use this time to reflect, speak softly with family, sometimes perform small spiritual rituals or prepare food for the next day. They don't frame this wakefulness as a disorder. There's no fixing involved. They just know from experience that it's a part of the night's rhythm, as natural as eating or breathing. Then there's southern Italy, where some older generations still remember the phrase primo sonno, first sleep. Especially in rural communities, people would go to bed shortly after nightfall, wake around midnight for a while, then settle back in until morning. It's a pattern that lingered well into the 20th century, particularly among farmers and shepherds, whose days revolved around sunlight and labour. Even in modern Spain, you'll catch echoes of segmented rest in the siesta culture. It's not a carbon copy. Daytime naps aren't the same as waking in the middle of the night. But it reflects a broader belief that sleep doesn't need to be crammed into one uninterrupted block. It can come in phases. It can flex. In Japan, too, something curious persists. Inimurai, a cultural practice where napping in public is not just tolerated, but sometimes respected. People rest in short bursts, on trains, in offices, even during meetings. Though Japan may not follow the exact biphasic medieval model, the concept of sleep as flexible, adaptable, and segmented still thrives in its own way. And if you zoom all the way out, you realise something big monophasic sleep, the 8-hour chunk we're told is normal, is mostly a modern industrial world phenomenon. Let's be real. Electricity didn't just light up our homes, it lit up our nights. It shoved work later, extended social hours, opened grocery stores until 1 a.m, and convinced us we could be productive and plugged in all the time. But in communities where light still fades when the sun dips below the horizon, the old patterns persist. People sleep when it's dark, wake when it feels right, sleep again when they're ready. It's not a failure of modernity, it's the memory of human biology. Even today, modern sleep researchers are looking at this. There's a growing field of study focused on circadian rhythms in low-light or no-light environments. The findings are wild. When people are removed from artificial light entirely, they often revert, without being told, to a segmented sleep cycle. They go to bed early, wake around midnight, drift back into sleep around 2 or 3 a.m, and they report feeling calmer, more rested, less anxious. Why? Because instead of forcing their body to obey the clock, they finally let their biology lead. And if you're thinking, wait a second, am I allowed to do that? The answer is yes. Even if you live in a world of blinking notifications and 24-hour everything, you can still opt into a gentler rhythm. It won't always look like the full medieval model. You probably won't be waking up to say matins with your local Benedictines, but you can reclaim that watch hour as something sacred again. You can stop fighting your wakefulness. You can use it for reading, reflection, soft music, or gentle thought. No guilt, no pressure to be productive, just being awake, in the dark, when the world is quiet and your brain doesn't expect anything of you. Some people even design their sleep this way on purpose. They go to bed early, say 9 p.m, wake for 90 minutes around midnight, then return to sleep until 6 or 7 a.m. And when they don't panic about the wake-up, when they treat that middle space as part of the night instead of a rupture, their sleep improves. So what does this mean for you? Maybe nothing, or maybe everything. Because if you've been waking up in the night and wondering what's wrong with you, if you've stared at the ceiling and cursed your brain for not shutting off, you can stop. You're not malfunctioning, you're remembering. You're dipping your toes into a rhythm that your ancestors knew by heart. that millions of people still live by, that your biology may deep down be yearning to return to. And no, the modern world doesn't make it easy. But sometimes just understanding the truth of your body is enough. Enough to let you forgive yourself for not sleeping like a machine. Enough to make that midnight wakefulness feel gentle, natural, maybe even welcome. You're not the only one awake at 2:13 a.m. Someone else, somewhere in the world, maybe in a village without streetlights, maybe in a Tokyo subway, maybe just down the block, is awake too. Stirring, breathing, thinking, remembering something soft and ancient. We are still the same species, we just forgot the lullaby for a while. And here we are, our final descent into the dark. You've wandered through centuries of midnight murmurs and candlelit stillness. You've shared beds with strangers, prayed with monks, stared into coals with nothing but your thoughts for company. You've seen the world's forgotten rhythm from the inside. But before we blow out the final lantern, there's one more thing we need to talk about. What did people feel about this way of sleeping? Not how it worked. Not what they did during the wake. But emotionally, was it comforting, boring, scary, sacred? Tonight we're exploring the emotional life of segmented sleep, the moods, metaphors and whispered meanings people attach to those strange soft hours between dreams. Let's start with something we rarely give sleep credit for: solitude. If you lived in the medieval world, you were almost never alone. Your house was crowded, your work was crowded, your bed was, let's be honest, crowded and full of people who snored like dying bagpipes. Privacy? A luxury of saints and nobility. Even thoughts could feel public when you lived shoulder to shoulder with 6 siblings, 2 goats, and a chimney that breathed more smoke into the house than out. But in the watch hour, that little slice of time between sleeps was yours. You might share a room, share a bed, but you could still find a pocket of peace. Maybe you stepped outside for a moment. Maybe you sat by the fire and poked at the embers like they were secrets. Maybe you didn't say a word. And for once, nobody expected you to. The medieval night offered a kind of emotional release you couldn't find during the day. You weren't expected to be productive. You weren't being watched or judged. You could feel what you needed to feel: grief, joy, confusion, longing, and let it drift across your chest like mist over a field. There's a 13th century diary entry that reads, "Woke in the hush, heart heavy, and watched the wind bend the ash outside. None saw me. That was comfort enough." That's the emotional tone right there. Not grand, not dramatic, but honest, and in a way, beautifully human. Now sure, some people were afraid of the night. We've covered that. The supernatural, the superstitious, the very real fear of fire or invasion. But for many, the night wasn't a threat. It was a companion. Poets loved it. The night became a metaphor for introspection, for mystery, for intimacy with God or self or nature. People describe the watch hour like a threshold, not fully earth, not fully heaven, a liminal bridge, a candlelit confessional, where you didn't need a priest because the silence was enough. There's something deeply moving in that, don't you think? And that's not just romanticism talking. Real people, with real hay in their hair and dirt under their fingernails, wrote about the comfort of the watch. They spoke about it in stories, wove it into lullabies. Parents told children not to be afraid if they woke during the night. It is only your heart remembering, one tale says, what it already knows. Some even found hope in it. Think about it. No matter how hard your day was, how angry your spouse was, how sore your body felt, how grim the news from the village, the watch gave you a moment to reset, to breathe, to pray, if that was your thing, or just sit quietly and remember who you are. The wake hour wasn't an interruption, it was a doorway, and people treated it that way. There's a stunning account from a 15th century woman, written in the margins of a psalter. "The house is still. My mind stirs like the wind. I do not dread this hour. I am more myself now than when I eat or speak." More herself in the dark. That hits, doesn't it? Now here's the flip side, and it's just as valid. Some people, they were bored, woke up, rolled over, tried to go back to sleep, thought about bread, wondered if the dog had fleas, maybe poked at the fire, dozed off again. Because not every watch hour was filled with vision and poetry and sacred stillness. Sometimes it was just the medieval equivalent of lying in bed and staring at the ceiling fan. And that's okay too, because that's part of the emotional spectrum of sleep. It's not always deep and meaningful. Sometimes it's just a fuzzy blankness, and even that has its place. But here's the real emotional through line that binds all this together: acceptance. People didn't treat wakefulness as a failure. They didn't panic if they found themselves blinking at the rafters. They didn't go into cortisol spirals, cursing their melatonin. They just existed in that space. Sometimes they did things, sometimes they didn't. But they accepted the wake as part of the night. Can you imagine what that might feel like now? To wake at 3:07 a.m. and not groan, not reach for your phone, not start worrying about bills or inboxes, just to breathe. Let your body be still. Let your mind float. Maybe whisper to someone next to you. Maybe sit by the window and watch the night wind comb the trees. That feeling, that's the thing we lost. We kept the beds, we kept the bedtime stories, we kept the dreams. But we forgot that being awake in the middle of the night doesn't have to mean something is wrong. It can mean something is right. That you're human. That your body knows a rhythm older than electricity. That your brain needs a little time to stretch between sleeps. That the night still holds a space for you, if you're willing to meet it. So maybe tonight, or next week, or some night when you find yourself staring at the wall at 2 a.m, remember this. You're not alone. You're not broken. You're not out of rhythm. You're just standing in a doorway that billions of people have stepped through before you. And on the other side, second sleep waits, warm, quiet, ready to hold you again. And there it is. 30 chapters, 1,000 years, and countless quiet hours later, we've circled back to now, to you, in bed, in the dark, listening. Maybe blinking slowly in that strange little in-between space where time feels like molasses and your pillow has somehow become a portal. You've wandered through medieval streets and smoky hearth-lit cottages. You've kept watch beside monks. You've prayed. You've stirred soup at 1 a.m. and whispered your secrets to strangers in shared beds. You've remembered a rhythm your body still knows, even if the modern world forgot. And now, you just rest. Because that's the truth under all of this. Sleep isn't something to fix, it's something to return to. So if you wake tonight, don't panic. Just greet the dark like an old friend. Stretch, breathe, think a little. Maybe listen for the house settling, for the wind shifting outside your window. That's your watch hour. It's not broken time, it's sacred. You don't have to do anything fancy with it. You don't have to write poetry or pray or invent a spinning wheel that runs on moonlight. Just be. And when your body's ready, let second sleep take you back. Because it will. It always does. You've done well, dreamer. Now dim the lights, if they're not already off. Pull the blanket up a little higher. Maybe turn your face toward the breeze of your fan or the softness of the night air and let go. The fire is low, the world is quiet, and you are safe. You are still, you are home.